And good evening, ladies and gents. Good day. And we're about to do Splendid Isolation 2, which is probably going to become a weekly thing, I believe. And before we start, as is tradition on my channel, I'm going to play us an appropriate tune. And there we go. That was Rule Britannia, and it was in the original arrangement, which they don't sing very often these days, back when the last night of the proms was still allowed to be a patriotic British event, and the BBC didn't try and change it. And just like to welcome my guest, Sojourner, the man of many names, and also Brutus has just joined us. Good evening, chaps.
Evening. Right. You all right? How's it going? What are we talking about?
Oh, I don't know. Your idea for the stream. I know what I'm going to start talking about because people always ask me. The battleship picture on the thumbnail is HMS Majestic from 1895. She's in the full glory of her Victorian colour scheme, which lasted up until 1902. And the Majestic class battleships, there were 9 of them, is the largest class of battleships that any nation has ever built.
Wow. There you go.
And they were kind of like flagships for the Royal Navy at the height of Splendid Isolation, so I thought they'd be perfect for the stream.
Yeah, good man. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so there you go. How's your hangover? Have you recovered yet?
I didn't have one. I didn't get a hangover.
I bloody did. I had an awful hangover. Lay in bed for a whole day. It was awful. So there you go.
I didn't have one. I only had 3 beers, so it wasn't a big deal really.
I seem to remember shouting out the window.
Yeah, I remember. Happy New Year. just your cows, I guess. Just the cows around in where you are.
Just the flipping local liberals I'm surrounded by.
I had a couple of rums, but it was like hours and hours before we even started our stream. So I'd had a sleep in between then, so there was no hangover for me.
All right. Well, seeing as you don't know what you're going to talk about, I'm going to throw a random subject matter at you. How about that?
Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. Minimum wage, yay or nay? I am a nay. I'm a nay, primarily because I think it punishes small businesses because they can't afford to pay it. Tesco's can afford to pay it, but small businesses can't, so they can't employ people.
Ditto. I agree with that, Brutus. Sergio?
I think on a theoretical level, I would say no, based on the economics. But
yep.
I mean, I just look at the minimum wage that you have in the UK today, and it's so low that really every business can afford to pay it.
That's not true.
No,
it ain't true. It's just because you're middle class. You don't know what the poor people are doing.
What is the minimum wage? It's like £7 an hour, right?
£8 something, I think.
Wage UK. There was another thing that came out not too long ago, the living wage, which is sort of voluntary thing. Here we go. National minimum wage and national living wages rates for 2020-21, 25 and over, £8.72. I mean, it's nothing. Who could live on £8.27 an hour? Oh,
no, a lot of people could, but
I'm not saying the wages are good, but some people do struggle to pay it. So there you go. I mean, I know some people that own small businesses and they live in fear of the government raising the minimum wage.
What do they do?
Eh?
What kind of businesses?
Well, I don't want to go into details, but I mean they do. So yeah, it's shit.
I mean, you're going to look at people who are doing obviously unskilled stuff. Part-time workers in shops, maybe small corner shops. I know that a lot of agricultural, like casual agricultural labouring work, where you're picking particular crops, is usually pretty badly paid. And in theory, I agree with what Brutus said, and as Sojana said. In theory, it's if you have a minimum wage, you're reducing the number of people who are going to be employed, basically.
Yeah,
but I mean, look at the just look at the data. We haven't really got a particularly high unemployment rate.
Well,
so,
I think we have now. I think we have now. So
oh yeah, but that's
it's being like covered up at the moment. But I think in the middle of this new year, we're gonna start getting unemployment figures which are much higher than they've been for years.
Yeah, and they just fiddle the figures as well. So that's why there's so many people in education, because they want to keep unemployed unemployment down. Also, if you're doing a job and you're working like 10 or 16 hours a week, you're counted as being employed when really, you can't survive on that wage. So, they kind of fiddle the figures to raise the unemployment figures up or down. Sorry. There's a lot more unemployed than the government's going to admit.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's true. That was true even before the China virus, not lockdowns and all that nonsense we've got at the moment. But in theory, strictly anyone who's got any understanding of economics, if you have a minimum wage, it reduces the number of people that's employed.
Yeah.
And I mean, if everyone is, if you've got full employment, which is, of course, not to say 100% employment, full employment is like somewhere between 75 and 85, 90%, like a real full employment. And that's even if you're allowing and encouraging most women to be in the workforce. If you've got full employment, then the minimum wage shouldn't really be an issue because scarcity of labor will push up the wages. I mean, this is one of the basics against mass immigration is that it forces down wages.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. This is like the 60s flipping utopia that my boomer parents always told me about. You could walk into a job one day, and if you didn't like it, you could walk out and find another job by the end of the week. It's just
my
because
father
you
told
had
me
full employment.
My father told me in the 1950s you could leave a job in the morning and probably have another one in the afternoon if you weren't that fussy about what you did. Could
you imagine it? It's just fantastic.
Mm.
And that's the ideal to go for. So, I mean, the idea is that if you let the market sort itself out and if you don't have mass immigration constantly driving down wages, then you should reach a point where you do have full employment. And then everyone gets paid what they should be paid, what they're worth, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, if we could somehow or another either end or massively reduce immigration, particularly from the third world, if we could do that, then I think then you could afford to get rid of the minimum wage because you wouldn't have these constant numbers of immigrants coming in and driving down wages. And you'd actually find real wages would rise.
Yeah. I would argue that the left wing pushes for the minimum wage and corporations push for it because they know that they know that small businesses struggle to pay it. I mean, and the classic example here would be America and the Bernie crowd, calling for a $15 minimum wage. And it's like, who can afford to pay that? Or maybe Walmart can pay it, but small businesses can't.
Yeah, I think particularly with the lockdowns and the number of small businesses which are going to go bankrupt as a result, and this kind of stuff, you really don't want any more pressure on small business than you have to put on it.
Yeah,
not at the moment, especially.
Yeah.
So
I don't really have a great deal more to add because I do agree with you in principle. I just simply thought that the minimum wage. I actually didn't. I think they must have changed it recently because this. The current minimum wage in the UK is £8.72 an hour, which I mean doesn't sound. It's not. I mean, it's not a great deal of money.
So if someone's doing 40 hours, tell me what that is. If someone's mathematics is better than mine.
Well, I'll just work it out on Google. So it's £348 a week. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. But then, Sojo, you got to look at the inflation rates. I mean, when I was first in the army at 18, I was incredibly impressed that I was on 90 quid a week or something. It's I thought that was pretty good.
Well, no, I'm saying that there is no way in the world I could live on £348 a week, and that's before tax.
Yeah, but you are a fairly middle class chap, so.
No, it is a struggle. It is a struggle on a minimum wage, and most people that live on it, they have to share with somebody else, and they have to live with someone else.
How would that compare to unemployment payments in UK at the moment?
I've got no idea. But I think I've never had housing benefits, but I assume a lot of people living on that wage kind of get topped up by the government, or maybe they don't. I don't know.
Yeah, there would be housing benefits if you've got kids. You get money for you get sort of what do they call it, family allowance and this kind of stuff, which I think everyone in UK gets, even if they don't need it.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why a lot of people, they find it's just better and easier to be unemployed, because it's like they start getting a minimum wage job, and then they slip out of the the benefits cycle, and they find they got less money. So.
Yeah. Like I said, I think the real solution to it is not minimum wage. It's to stop mass immigration, or at least drastically reduce it, because then you're going to stop not only the constant downward pressure on wages, but also the constant upward pressure on housing costs, whether people are buying houses or even if they're renting. Mass immigration obviously forces up housing costs at the same time as it pushes down wages.
I think that's the other side of the equation as well. I mean, housing costs, like if rent wasn't so high, you wouldn't need to get paid so much, Yeah. So,
but the ideal should be that you've got somewhere near full employment, and if you get somewhere near that, and like I said, that's not 100% employment. That's like ridiculous. And also, you've got to allow for the fact that women are actually pushed into the employment economy these days. And you don't necessarily need to do that quite so hard as we do. And you would then get back to that situation that we were talking about in the 50s and the early 60s, when you'd have full employment, and then wages would actually go up, real wages, because people would be competing for workers rather than like workers competing for jobs.
Yeah. Women strike. That's what I'm advocating for. Women strike. Don't go to the work. Just sit at home. Sit at home, ladies. Let the men work, and we'll get paid more. And you could just sit at home and keep the house clean. There you go. Perfect solution.
Yeah, I don't know. You see, the thing was, housewives back in the day, years and years and years ago now, before all these labor-saving devices, that was quite a lot of work. There's so many labor-saving devices these days. I'm not sure that housewives are actually, they're not particularly hard-working, a lot of them these days. If you look at them, a lot of them are ladies who lunch and this kind of thing,
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Actually, I think there's something to the whole the feminist rev. I mean, I think with the best of lies, there's always an element of truth in there. And this whole feminist revolution that kicks off in the 60s in America with I forget the name of that Jew. What was her name? She wrote a book called Feminist Mystique, The Feminine Mystique. Anyway, she wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique, and basically she interviewed all these bored housewives in all these suburbs.
Yeah, it's been terrible.
Yeah, and basically the conclusion of the book is that you can't have an orgasm cleaning the kitchen floor, and it's that was it really. And
yeah, all right.
I forget her name. I'll have to look it up. But anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that I think there's an element of truth in that suburbia was very boring for housewives. Just the architecture of suburbia, in that you're way out there on the outskirts of the city. You're not in walking distance of your friends. You don't have the same sense of community that people used to have in,
You're talking about America, but you're talking about America, Brutus, not the UK.
I'm talking about America, but I mean, it's also sort of a thing here as well with council estates and so on and so forth. You don't have the sense of community that traditional towns would have, where you kind of walk out your front door and the shops are just 2 minutes walk away, and there's more I don't know, social interaction. So I think I think there's a sliver of truth there that the bored housewives is actually a thing.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'm sure the bored housewives is a thing, but that's because they didn't have enough to do. Like, if you'd have looked at housewives in, say, the 19th century, particularly if they were working class housewives who didn't have maids and all this kind of stuff, which used to be one of the major forms of female employment, of course, like was maids and servants and this kind of stuff. But if you look at working class housewives in the 19th century, I think they had too much to do to be bored, quite frankly. Whereas, okay, so yeah, I would say that average families would be happier today or any time really in like a leafy suburb than they would be in a vile high-rise estate in the middle of a city.
Oh, I'm not proposing a high-rise estate in the city, but I mean, I'm saying like in the past, our villages kind of.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, in a village, I agree with you totally. But the village life has been going like smaller and smaller since certainly the end of the 18th century. Less and less people have been living in the countryside since the end of the 18th century, at least.
Well, I was just laughing at the chat. No, I'm talking about the architecture here, Duke. I'm talking about the architecture of the village. I don't know what happened in how planning permission changed, but whatever happened, for some reason, people in the past, when you build a new house, you'd build it right next door to your neighbor, and there wouldn't be a gap in between. For some reason, that doesn't seem to be possible anymore, and I don't know why. But you walk around an old town or an old village, all the houses squashed together. Not just terraced houses, but even like just cottages and things. But
I lived in a village when I was in England, in Berkshire, and I suppose it would take 10 minutes to walk from one end to the other.
Yeah,
because it was a very small little village. But we had a church, we had one pub, and that was it. There were no shops in the village to go to. The nearest shops were in the two villages either side. But there was one pub which had a kind of a bit of a restaurant attached to it, and there was a church, and that was it.
Yeah.
So, but you could walk to the shops, I suppose. There were no pavements to walk to them, but I mean, it wasn't. The roads were not very busy because they were country lanes, and you could walk to the nearest shops in probably 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in the 19th century it would have been the same, but the only difference would have been you wouldn't have had a car. But you might have had an awesome car or something, If you've been a woman, I'm talking about. All right, she could talk to her neighbours, but the ladies who lived in this village I lived in could talk to each other then. So, I'm not sure if things had changed all that much. And plus, of course, then we had telephones.
Hang on, but you're agreeing with me. That's what I'm saying. The architecture of the village is different to the architecture of the suburb.
Maybe, but suburbs you've got neighbours. But you've got neighbours on both sides. Even if you live in a detached house, you've still got neighbours on both sides of you.
But you don't have the same sense of community in a suburb as in a village.
No, probably you don't. That's probably true.
Well, there you go.
I do take that, but I just think that I don't understand why life's supposed to be perfect. Women sometimes got bored in suburbs. Well, I'm pretty sure a lot of guys get bored doing factory jobs.
Yeah, I'm not justifying the feminist revolution here. All I'm saying is that with the best of lies, there's always an element of truth. And so there is an element of truth to what Betty Friedan, by the way, I looked it up. Betty Friedan said in the Feminine Mystique, there is that the concept of the bored suburban housewife is a real thing. There was some dissatisfaction there, and that's for a multiplicity of reasons. But one of the reasons is just the architecture of the suburb. It makes it harder to have a sense of community, basically.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Just like to say a shout out to Semi-Agog in the chat. What have you got to say? So, Semi-Agog, I follow his channel. He's got quite an interesting channel. Am
I Tim Roth advocating operating
incognito? Yes,
Tim Roth. It's Tim Roth from I think you probably know him from Pulp Fiction mainly.
Oh yeah.
Yes,
I am Tim Roth. Yeah.
There you go. He likes that character, obviously. Sojano, what do you reckon about bored housewives and feminism?
Well, I mean, certainly the technological changes that happened in the, I suppose, the mid part of the 20th century, and all the appliances, it genuinely did mean that sort of typical household chores became much easier.
Yep.
And I have to say, as a single man, living in an apartment, it's incredibly easy for me to keep it clean.
Yep.
I mean, I literally have a dishwasher, washing machine, tumble dryer, oven, sous vide, whatever.
Vacuum
It
cleaner,
is
that
it
sort of
is
thing. Yeah.
easy. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no work at all whatsoever. Give it a hoover once a day, put your dirty dishes and cups into the dishwasher, and you're done.
Yeah.
Hang
But
on a minute. You hoover your house once a day.
I would give it a quick once over.
Jesus Christ! How often do you hoover your house, Duke?
Probably twice a week, I guess, something like that.
Twice a. Oh, geez! Wow.
But I've got a dog, you understand. So I get I've got dog
fair
hairs. I've got dog hairs that need hoovering up.
Oh,
So
gosh.
I do it twice a week. Sometimes I might only do it once a week if I'm feeling a bit lazy or I'm busy.
Well, I have to say that I have wooden floors, so actually, what I do is I sweep. I give it, if I see any dirt, I give it a quick sweep, and then I hoover up the sort of the mound of dust and stuff if it's there. It's I mean, it's
God.
just really not that much effort at all.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. I think homemakers, as they like to call themselves these days, I think their main contribution is if you're married and you've got children, particularly small children, is that they're there for the kids, so that you don't have to drop them off at school at 8 a.m. in the morning and then bring them home at 6 p.m. in the evening, which a lot of people do, certainly in Australia, for example. Like state schools in Australia are almost like childminding facilities as much as anything else.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very healthy for little children to be, I mean, they get put straight into kind of nursery, kindergarten, that kind of stuff when they're like 4 or something like that. And then when they get to junior school, when they're say 7, like I said, there's a lot of kids, because both parents are working, they get dropped off at school about 8 o'clock in the morning and they don't get picked up until after 6. Don't think that's particularly healthy for kids.
Oh,
Yeah.
Why?
And if you've got
What do you mean? Why? You serious, Sojo?
Yeah, I think it's much better for them to be home. I think children, especially young children, benefit from having their mother around. I mean, I think they benefit from having both parents around, but mothers in particular when they're little.
You think being raised by strangers is good, Sojo?
No, I don't. But fundamentally, you have to get your children educated somewhere, and unless you're going to homeschool them, then it kind of just makes sense to me to you at that point. I mean, what's the age that you just mentioned? 7 years old that they start going to sort of full-time school.
Yeah, junior school. Yeah.
Yeah, then you can just
oh God.
Then the woman can go back to work. I really don't see.
I don't think. Look, I think it's okay. I mean, 7. Do kids really need to go to full-time school at 7? I'm not sure they do, to be honest.
No, I don't think so either.
But let's say they do, and I'm trying to remember back to my very, very young age, because like my little boy went to a pre-prep school because like I was determined to turn him into a middle-class git. So, but anyway, that's a joke, by the way, Sergio. You basically start school at 9:30 and you really finish at about 3:30, 4 o'clock. So I reckon that's okay. But like I said, what happens with a lot of kids where both parents are working is they're actually dropped off at school like at 8, i.e. an hour and a half before they need be. And they're not picked up until like 2.5 hours after really the school day's finished, because the school is acting as basically childminding. And I think that's a disadvantage. I think it would be much better if they had like maybe their dad could drop them off in the morning on the way to work, and then their mum could pick them up in the afternoon at like a reasonable time, like 4 o'clock, something like that. And then spend a couple of hours with the kids, especially when they're little, when they're small, prior to, dad coming home from work. I think that would be a much healthier system and better for the children.
Yeah, but I mean, looking back on my childhood, I would come home from school and then I would go off and do my own thing. I'd go out and play with the kids outside. I wouldn't really.
Well, when you were 7 or 8?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so you were living in quite a nice area then.
Yeah.
Because my child was allowed to play with the neighbours, sure, but like I said, we lived in a little village, so yeah, I don't know. I think the ideal situation, like, and the main reason to have a housewife these days is if you're married and you've got kids, so she's there for the kids, and the kids don't have to spend more time than they have to in the education system. But that leads me on to a segue, which I think we could possibly talk about that might be interesting. I think, and I'm seeing more and more of it on channels that I follow, that right-wing and reactionary people are more and more talking about homeschooling.
Yeah.
Because of the state education system is not only is it like used as child minding, it's also constant globo homo propaganda for kids these days, and doesn't teach them a great deal in many respects.
Well, there's the issue of credentials, which fundamentally are they are important because that's going to be sort of one of the defining factors that gets you into a grammar school or gets you into university or whatever. So I think there is that issue to get around.
Yeah, okay, but let's say if you're talking about grammar schools, I agree. I'd like to see grammar schools come back because I think they were great for very bright working class kids. They were a chance for bright working class children to actually get some social mobility. And you see some like quite famous people today who came up through the grammar school system. And interestingly, quite a lot of former, in the old days, Labour MPs did that. And then they kind of pulled the ladder up behind them by getting rid of grammar schools, which was quite interesting, I thought. So, yeah, I'm entirely in favour of grammar schools. And if you're going to have grammar schools, to make them worthwhile, you've got to have some sort of 11 plus examination so that you can sort kids when they get to 11 before they go to the higher school. But I don't think that most education that kids do between the ages of, up till the age of, let's say, 9 anyway, I don't think much of that has got anything much to do with qualifications and this kind of stuff. The stuff that kids learn up to the age of about 9, certainly, probably even 10, really.
But I think you have to remember that it's not just about what you're learning, but also the people that you're socializing with as well, and those friendships that you're making.
Yeah, no, but when I'm talking about homeschooling, I'm not talking about one or two children being at home schooled by one parent. Like the way homeschooling works in places where it's pretty big, like in America, for example, is you have to get a group of people together, so that you still end up with a community of children. Yes. It's just they don't get taught all the globo homo stuff. And also, of course, you've got to be able to draw in talents of various parents and people the parents know to do the teaching. Yeah. So I'm not talking about a situation where a child basically never leaves the home and just gets taught by their own parents. I'm not really talking about that.
Yeah, well, I think in many ways, what you really seem to be describing to me is a sort of your own private school.
Yeah.
If you are going to homeschool in that manner, then it's probably going to come with the costs of a private school anyway. So I kind of just think to myself, you may as well just find yourself a good private school. I mean,
if you can.
I think that the private schools will be relatively okay. I mean, I know that we get the occasional story here, now and then. Take Eton, for instance, but I think
one we were talking about a couple of weeks ago.
That one. But I think that the private schools are subject to market forces, aren't they?
They are, but they're also subject to government regulation, which is increasingly globo homo, even under a supposedly conservative government. I mean, I would argue that Alexander Boris Johnson's government is not conservative in any way, shape, or form. But
yeah, but herein lies the problem, which is that if they start putting this kind of extreme liberalism into curriculums and then tie it to credentials, I mean, you're going to have to teach your children at the very minimum to pass the test, but also to tell them, listen, this is just rubbish, but we've got to do it for the credentials. So
I don't know. I think you've also got to look at, like, so many people are going to university these days who probably shouldn't even go at all. They'd be better off doing a trade or something of that nature.
Well, yeah, certainly. But I mean, that's not to say that university doesn't have its place. I mean, it certainly does.
I'm not saying that. I think university could be more relevant, but the way to make it more relevant is for far less people to go to it. So it's actually harder to get there.
Yeah, make it harder.
Yeah, I think it should be harder to get into university. And if you could have, like, fewer people actually going to university, you could also probably afford to make it a bit cheaper.
Yeah, the uni problem needs to be stopped. We've got too many people going. I mean, the thing about the university is basically
they do shit degrees when they get there, so many of them.
Basically, what is happening here is the whole thing is a scam. What is happening is that as soon as a child becomes an adult and is able to take debt, he's forced into a university in order to take on 10, 20, 30,000 pounds of debt. That's all it is. It's a debt scam. It's a way of banks forcing you to borrow money, and it's disguised as education, and it's pushed forward by parents and teachers and other authority figures who have so-called good intentions, but really they don't, because they're stupid. So it's just it's a debt scam. That's what it is.
Well, there's not only that. There's also the fact that adolescence these days seems to, for many people, it goes on well into their 20s. There's many guys. I've known guys who were 30 who were basically still teenagers in the way they thought about life.
Well, yeah, it's another thing about university. I mean, and you'll see this in the way it's advertised, actually, to young students. It's not even advertised anymore as a way of getting a job. It's advertised as an experience. Yeah. And so it was even this in my day, and that was 20 years ago, but it's like, oh, I've got to go and have the uni experience. So what does that mean? It means you leave home, you go to a big city somewhere where there's a university, you borrow a whole bunch of money, and you drink for 3 years.
Yep.
That's what it is.
Pretty much. And also, don't forget, these days particularly, and I know this is true in Britain, I know it's true in America, and I know it's true in Australia because I looked it up the other week, more women are now going to university than men. And more women get stupid degrees than men do.
Yeah.
Gender studies and all this other crap, which is of no use to man nor beast.
How are we going to stop it then? I mean, I'm assuming both of you are going to be against government subsidies for student loans. Are you against that?
I'm actually, I'd like to reduce the number of people going to university, and I think part of the way of doing that is to encourage more people to go into skilled trades. We're always going to need plumbers. We're always going to need bricklayers. You're not going to be able to automate that stuff. Electricians, all sorts of things like that. So I think you should encourage more people to do that. But I think if you can do that so that, like, a smaller proportion of the population is going to university, you can probably make it more affordable if you make the academic requirements for entry higher. Like, I'd like to see universities go back to what they were like in the 50s, etc., when universities were competing for the best students. And students would look around and try and get into the best university they could with the qualifications that they'd earned at O and A level. And I think that's the more viable system. And
so instead of having universities compete for the most students, you get them to compete for the best students.
Yes, exactly right. Yes,
because right now they're just competing for the most, so it's like a race to the bottom, isn't it?
Yeah, and also you need to get rid of a lot of these absolutely pointless degrees like gender studies and that kind of thing. People should not be able to go to university and get a degree in gender studies. It's just ridiculous. I'd sack everyone involved with that.
Right. Yeah. But because just in regard to the student loan thing, just to point out the obvious, it's like the government says they're going to give you a student loan, so all that happens is the university just raises its what do you call it, tuition fees, That's all that happens. That's all that happens when the government subsidizes anything, basically.
But I just point out that, like, in the 1970s, when I was a young guy, before I got enough O and A levels to go to university, but I joined the army, which was possibly not the most intelligent thing I ever did. But back then, you didn't need a student loan. Like, university tuition was basically free, but that was at a time when about 20% of people were going to university. And I think 25% is about the number that probably should go to university.
Yeah, it's a Pareto principle, isn't it? That's what you want. You want like a 20% kind of middle class or management class or something like that.
And as Semiagog is saying in the chat, and we need a lot more skilled tradesmen. Like, for a lot of young men, and I know Sojo and I were talking about this at some point in the past. For a lot of young men, you can earn a much better living as a skilled tradesman than you can do by going to university and getting a degree, which you then can't get very highly paid for when you first start work.
Yeah.
Sojo, what do you think about, like, people learning trades and this kind of stuff?
Certainly. I mean, I'm living proof of that. I came out of, I did my A-levels, and I rather than doing computer science or physics at university, I just went straight into engineering. So it is possible. You just, I think the problem is that you really have to plan it out and really think it through before you do it, and understand what your career path is and how you will achieve it by not going through university, for instance. So I would say that, if we're going to roll back, in an ideal world, if we were to roll back the level of enrollment into university, then there would have to be in its place vocational routes for people to take. So presumably that was the role of the polytechnics, right? People went in, did engineering and plumbing, electrics, and so on. But I mean, the strange thing is that all of these options still exist, and actually people overlook them.
Yeah.
And I actually think that there is a level of snobbery when it comes to the idea of being a plasterer, the idea of being a plumber, the idea of being an electrician. But that's very short-sighted, because if you're a very intelligent person and you go into the electrician trade, you could end up having your own company with many men working under you.
Absolutely.
So there are many avenues where there is tremendous value to be had if you've got the smarts for it. But for some reason, people overlook it. So it's a funny one. You can sort of guide people into these routes. But the irony is that these opportunities exist at the moment, and people are making these crazy decisions to do a degree in philosophy or in media studies, I think, without really having a clear idea of what they're going to end up doing. So I think there is a kind of cultural malaise where people they're just going to university, but not really thinking about what they're going to do, what they're going to earn, what their career prospects are going to be. Is there an opportunity to develop your own business? I think most people don't really think that way. I think that's a very small minority of people who actually think in that kind of systematic way.
Yeah.
So
I don't think anybody thinks that way at 18, though, do they? It's the problem.
Well, I don't know, but Brutus, like my boy, like when he didn't end up with a lot of university debt because the Royal Navy sponsored him, because he was always going into the Royal Navy. So he ended up with some debt, but not very much, because the Royal Navy paid some of it. Because they did all these interviews, and he went away for courses and all this stuff. And they said, look, this chap's going to make a fine Royal Navy officer, we think. So we're going to take a gamble on him and sponsor him at uni. And then, of course, he finished up going to the Royal Naval College. So there are ways you can do it without getting into debt if you're thinking about what you're going to do. That group,
the point I'm making is most young men have no idea what they want to do with it. They don't think or plan at the age of 18. Do you know what I mean?
Well, maybe that's one of the things we should be encouraging them to do, that. as nationalists. Like that Albion group that I told you about, who's got the Albion YouTube channel. Yeah. Their last video was precisely this. It was 4 relatively young guys talking about careers for young men, particularly, and they were actually saying that like one of the things they noticed, because some of them had been to uni and some of them hadn't, was that young guys who went into apprenticeships, for example, and like by the time they were 22 or so, were more or less qualified. They were much more grown up and manly, in inverted commas, than the average uni student. And like it showed when these guys were out on the town at the weekend and this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
And the girls were much more impressed with these chaps who were like making their own living than they were with these blokes who were sharing houses and like doing part-time barman jobs to keep their uni time going. So but I agree with what you're saying, that people don't think enough about it. But that's one of the things we need to work on changing. We need to say to young guys, look, you've got to look at this actually you've got to start looking at it when you're about 15, 16, I'd say. What is it you actually want to do? Now, people argue that's probably too young, but it isn't, not the way our system works these days. But you certainly shouldn't overlook trades. I mean, like, especially in Australia, the tradie is like, it's a big meme over here because they're always like very competent, manly blokes. They've usually got good hobbies they can go and do at the weekend because they can afford it. Mostly when they get married and they have a couple of kids, they can afford a nice house somewhere because they're earning a reasonable living. And they're generally like very confident, manly, blokey blokes, And it's something we should encourage young men to look at.
Yep. White man van revolution, or white van man, what white man, whatever. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, that and starting your own business, of course, is another thing, although that's often related to doing a trade. But, if you don't want to do a trade, it's not impossible to start your own business. Like, I didn't start my own business because I went into the army, but when I left the army, I did.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing you've got to look at, and it's the thing we were talking about the other day with these insane lockdowns. It's making that sort of thing entirely much more difficult than it used to be.
Yeah.
So, Jenna?
I don't really have anything else to add, really.
We didn't really fully get that. I mean, we all agree we want less people going to uni. I don't think we agreed on how to stop people from going to university.
Well, get rid of the shit courses for a start. So that will be one way.
But hang on. So you're going to just interfere? The government's just going to like say you're not allowed to teach this subject matter? I don't really believe in that.
Wasn't it Hungary that banned gender studies recently? Was it Hungary? I think Viktor Orban.
Okay.
I'm not against that. Not that would ever happen under Alexander Boris Johnson, but
well, what you
I would be against that actually. Like, why? Like, people should have the freedom to study whatever they want. I don't see like why.
Okay. Here's my proposal. So, if you didn't want the government to explicitly say no, you cannot teach this particular course, what you could do is say, well, the government is the one who underwrites these loans to students. And we've determined that taking a gender studies course does not represent a very good outlook on our return on investment. You're a credit risk to us, and therefore we will no longer provide funds for these particular courses. You can still take them if you wish, but you will have to either secure the loan yourself or find ways to finance it yourself.
Yeah, excellent idea.
That's one way that you could still technically allow people to do those courses. But you're making it very hard.
Yeah, don't fund them with public money. Absolutely right.
Well, or you could just the government could just stop giving people money for student loans, full stop, or stop supporting the universities altogether. So they have to stand on their own 2 feet. If they've got to stand on their own 2 feet and they're not being subsidized by the government, then in a natural way, they'll end up, giving people a decent education.
Maybe.
No? Maybe? Yay or nay? Maybe?
Listen, I know one of the things I've heard a lot of talk about on different channels that I follow is and for example, on academic agent streaming, one of the reasons he's doing the courses he's doing is that people are talking about people on the right, reactionaries, whatever you would like to call us, setting up parallel systems to the current globo homo systems. And that might also be a way to go, although then you've got to look at getting these qualifications recognized by businesses at least.
Yeah,
that's the problem. Accreditation. I don't know a thing about it, but I would imagine that in order to be certified as a legit university, that you have to abide by certain rules and regulations. So,
I'm sure you do, but
those,
they don't
and of
have
course,
to be.
The whole point of having a parallel institution is to get away from those. So there's this whole carrot and stick and this control mechanism whereby the accreditation only comes with these conditions attached, but those conditions attached to the things that we want to get away from. So it's very hard to. This is a very hard problem, I think.
But if you can get businesses, like not the government, I'm not talking about people who work for the government, and that's a lot of people these days, I admit. But if you could get individual businesses to accept accreditation from independent teaching organizations, shall we say, if you could get businesses to just say, yeah, okay, you've done this course, you've got this passing grade, and we actually know that means you're better than most people from state universities. That might be the way around that.
What I would like to see is a test like the bar, which I've heard is a thing they have in America, where you could just turn up and you just take the exam, and if you pass the exam, then you're qualified to practice law. I mean, why can't we just have that? Why can't we just have the exam? Do you know what I mean? Why do I even have to pay to go to university? Why can't I just read the books myself and just turn up, take an exam, write an essay, and someone marks it and they're like, oh yeah, you're good.
You can actually do that with A levels.
You can do it with A levels. Yeah.
You can sign yourself up with one of the examination boards to take an exam in London, one of their central London exam halls.
Right.
And you can get your A levels without going to a college.
And how many people know that, do you think, Sergio? I didn't.
Not very many.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Why can't we have that for? Why can't we have?
In fact, we do have level? We do have that. It's called the Open University Home Learning. So
you got to pay. You got to pay for that.
Yeah, you do have to pay, but it's not as expensive.
No,
as
you only spend a couple of weeks a year actually at the university, as far as I remember.
It's $6,000 a year.
What, the Open University?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how much?
Since I looked.
How much?
I was
of
looking
that?
at mathematics, and it was like $2,500 when I looked. But that would have been a long time ago, 10 years at least.
Yeah, so maybe $6,000 sounds probably about right with the levels of inflation we have these days. But I mean, a lot of that I think is also you don't have to do like a 2-week course or something actually at the university. So I would imagine a fair amount of that money is probably that. I'm pretty sure you do. Well, you certainly used to have to. You had to spend at least 2 weeks not a term. I think it was 2 weeks a year actually at the university.
Anyway, all I'm saying, it would be good if you had some kind of state organized examination thing where you could just turn up, write a few essays, do the official examination, and if you pass it, you pass it.
I don't disagree with that at all. But I think what we're saying is that there are ways around this. There are ways that we could make the system we've got better, and that we could allow more independent organizations in to teach people. And it really and truly, all right, you could. The only thing the government we don't want the government to interfere with in parallel institutions that are for right-wing or reactionary people is we don't want nonsense about diversity and you've got to have so many women and all this bullshit. That's the only stuff we don't want them to interfere with, because presumably academically we would aim for higher standards than the current universities.
Shout out to Susie in the chat. She says, set up your own uni, take $9,000 a year for useless gender studies courses, fail everyone at the end, and that would put people off quickly. I'm
Yeah,
up for
not
that.
bad.
Let's do it. Let's do a gender studies course.
Yeah, not bad. No, I like Sojo's solution to that is the government just doesn't subsidise useless courses.
We should do a gender studies course, and at the end, the examination is just how many sexes are there. If they say 2, they pass. If they say there's 24, they fail, and that's it.
I mean, there are people who...
Why don't we have a look at the data? Because I just thought to myself, I'd love to see the numbers of what courses people are taking and in what amounts. And this data is actually available. So because it's interesting, right? We talk about these gender studies and feminist courses, but we don't know how many people are actually taking them. And is it a significant number? Is this being blown out of proportion?
Well, I think part of the problem is it doesn't really matter so much how many people are specifically doing gender studies. The problem is gender studies has seeped into, your average English lit degree or your average
Absolutely right,
or law degree or whatever. It's all pervading. Only the real lunatics study gender studies.
Yeah, but you've also got stuff like there's lots of people who are doing, say, English courses, and you've got all this post-colonial literature and bullshit like that, which, in my view, just shouldn't be a university subject. Or, like Sojourner says, there shouldn't be any public money put into people who are studying it. Nothing.
Yeah.
Like if Nigeria wants to put money into it, good luck to it. But Britain shouldn't be doing that.
So, hang on, just to get specific, like you two, you don't agree with my idea of just defunding the universities and letting them stand on their own 2 feet. You think the government should...
No, I agree.
Oh,
yeah,
agree?
no, I wouldn't be against doing that. I just don't think it's very likely to happen.
Okay.
My problem with the problem that I see with the universities at the moment is that it's been turned into an industry. It's been turned into a commodity product, and of course, then growth is always going to be very important. That's why there's such an emphasis on foreign students.
Yeah.
And in my view, education shouldn't really be viewed as a mass market commodity. It shouldn't be financialized. It shouldn't be seen as a.
Well, how are they going to make money? If the government's not going to pay for it, then how are they going to make money? They've got to make money, right?
But
it is a business, right?
Well, they're not privately owned. They're just sort of non-profit organizations. So there shouldn't, in my view, there shouldn't be a profit motive. There shouldn't be this desire to increase the bureaucratic sort of remit of the institution and grow its headcount for the sake of it.
Right.
It should be quality over quantity.
And I think there also should be a limited number of kind of scholarships to universities for particularly important subjects for very, very bright people. So that there is an incentive there for like someone who's let's say it's a STEM field or something like that. There should be incentives for the very brightest people from Britain, not from overseas, to go and do a course, and the government could say, okay, you because you're the top 5% or whatever it might be, you're not going to end up with a load of university debt, provided you do the right subject.
I think you're right when you say you have to make universities. They should want the best students instead of the most students. That's got to be the key to it. I mean, this is why, for example, an Oxford degree is still worth something, isn't it?
Yeah, going down increasingly these days, though, because it's
but you'll always get a job. You'll never be unemployed if you've got.
It depends what course you do. I'm sure. I'm pretty sure it depends what course you do.
I don't know about that.
If you're in HR and you're interviewing and you've got one application from an Oxford grad and someone from, I don't know, De Montfort or whatever, who are you going to pick? You're going to pick the Oxford grad, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think maybe if they're equal, and one guy was from, say, London University, which used to have a good reputation. I don't know if it still has.
UCL.
Yeah, University of London used to have a very good reputation. I don't know if it does now.
It's probably part of the what's that group of the elite? Russell group. If they're in the Russell group, then they're going to be. It's the red bricks that are sort of looked down upon, I think.
Yeah, which again I don't think should be right. But if we went the way we're talking about and we made university education actually somewhat more elite, That probably is something that we could get over. Like you'd have more better universities, even if they had fewer students.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Questions in the chat. Hey, what about all right, so we've done unis. We're going to defund the unis. Are you two on board with my epic libertarian plan of totally defunding education? Just put it into the private sector. Fuck it. Don't want to pay for it. 80 billion a year. I'm not paying for a bunch of lazy socialist teachers to just sit around doing nothing. I think if people want to pay for education, they should pay for it themselves. It's not the government's job to pay for it, and it's not a natural monopoly.
I think my only concern with this is that I think a lot of the sort of lower classes wouldn't send their kids to school in that case.
Well, yeah, and okay, counter argument to be that would be, well, do they really need to send their kids to school? I mean, you're going to need to learn how to read and write. In the past, that used to be done at Sunday school, 1 day a week. So you learn to read, you learn to write, you learn a bit of basic mathematics. How much of an education do you need if you're just going to work in Tesco's? Not trying to insult the working classes, but I mean, how much of an education do you need?
I think you've got to have a certain minimal level of education. You've got to teach people 3 hours at least.
Yeah, okay. And how much effort does that take?
I don't think you necessarily should
learn that at Sunday school.
Well, I don't know about that, but I don't think necessarily kids should be encouraged to be doing education from 7 to 18. I think that's too long for most kids, to be honest with you. Certainly if they're not going to university and they're not looking for that sort of a job.
I mean, I guess my view of education is just it's a lifelong process. I mean, I consider myself to be basically self-educated. I do remember some things from school, but I mean, you learn by reading, right?
I learned nothing useful at school at all, like nothing whatsoever.
I still think that, just this thought of all of these sort of like working class kids running riot around the place, sort of fills me with dread. If you're not going to send them to school, at least send them to a sort of a disciplinary school where they're taught to behave.
Oh Jesus! So
and stay in line. And I think I'd be happy in that case. Yeah.
Okay. How about this? Look, my father left school. My father was born in 1933, and he was like 12 at the end of World War II, and he left school at 15. His first job was a van boy for the Southern Railway, which was looking after a great big Shire horse and going around with the driver of the Shire horse every day. And my father loved it because it was looking after the horse, like he always had shining tack and his coat was always well groomed and all this stuff because my old man loved him, So he left school at 15. His dad, who was a professional soldier afterwards, he left school at 14. I think there is something to be said about kids who don't want to follow an academic career. There is something to be said for them leaving school at certainly 15. But then to take Sojo's point, and something we've again talked about in the past, maybe what you then do is when they get to 18, you give them a year of national service of some description.
Yeah, I'd definitely be in favour of that. I think we're all in favour of that, aren't they? Year of national service.
Yeah, you can't have these people running around like feral animals. It's just they need to be.
Oh, Jesus Christ! Kids need to be allowed to play, Sojo.
Yeah, but they still need to be shaped as men, don't they?
Well, I think that if you have kids leaving school at say 15, if they're not pursuing an academic career, because up to 15 should be plenty of time to teach them basic reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Well, yeah, but that's the case now that you finish school at 16, 1 year above your the number you just mentioned.
All I'm saying is let's reduce that by a year, because that last year, if you're not going to university, is probably pretty much wasted, really. And most of the kids are bored shitless by then if they're not following an academic kind of bent. And then at 18. They can go and do a year national service, and like if they're boys, they can go and do something military, perhaps, or naval, or whatever. And if they're girls, we can find something else for them to do.
So what do they do in the intervening 3 years?
Well, work.
Work.
Yeah, get a job.
You're going to put somebody into a job and then
do an apprenticeship.
You're going to put somebody into an apprenticeship for 3 years and then yank them out and put them in the army. I mean, why not just put them into national service at the age of 16, do their year, and then go into whatever they're going to do?
Well, yeah, I suppose you could do it that way. They'd be entirely militarily useless, but yeah, I suppose you could do it that way.
Yeah, but again, I mean, we have this
hang on a minute. Why would they be useless? I'm pretty sure I remember back in Victorian age we had British officers that were very young because they came from
not 16, mate. Not 16. I mean, you're right. Yeah, in the Georgian period, Napoleonic Wars, right. You had occasional like midshipmen in the Royal Navy and ensigns and cornets in the army who were that sort of age, but they were entirely useless and like basically were just there for experience.
Right, but you did have boys loading the cannons and things like this.
Yeah, you had ship's boys, certainly you did, and you had the famous drummer boys in the army. So yeah, you had that sort of thing going on.
Okay.
So I suppose you could do it that way. I suppose you could have kids leaving school at 15 if they chose to, and then doing a year's some sort of paramilitary adventure training or something like that. Yeah, fair enough. You could do that. Yeah, I wouldn't be against that idea. And I think a lot of boys would probably enjoy it more than doing sixth form at school.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe that's the way. I mean, also the other thing we're overlooking, of course, is that the real problem, like with all this feral stuff we're talking about and what have you, is there's no kind of religious moral framework anymore. I think that's one of the other things we've got to look at. And I'm an atheist, okay, but I'm not at all a militant atheist. Like, it's just my own personal view, and I accept that basic Christianity is actually good for most people. And I think that's the other lack you've got to look at in the modern world, is that you don't, like, my father went to Sunday school because his mother insisted on him going. And yeah, he learned some basic moral lessons there for sure. So you've got to look at that in the modern world. We don't have that now, do we?
I think we should just bring back child labor.
Oh, come on, Brutus. Give us a break.
No, that's the problem. The problem is when I say that, you automatically think of kids slaving away in factories, right? I obviously don't believe in that, but I mean, children should work for their parents. Like, if your dad's a carpenter, you work with your father and you learn to become a carpenter or a plumber.
Yeah, I got no problem with that. And kids, like, I got no problem with kids doing paper rounds and that sort of thing. I mean, I did that for a while when I was a kid, and I did a bit of car cleaning occasionally for some pocket money. So yeah, I got nothing against that. I mean, my dad, when he was evacuated,
there definitely should be some child labor laws which stop kids from working in factories.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for trades, they should learn from their parents. I mean, this is we're getting into a much deeper question now. But I mean, I do think that in a real traditional society, you will just take the occupation of your father, and you'll learn it from a young age. And so you'll know from a young age who you are, what your destiny in life is.
Soon as you got a father, of course, that's at home.
Yeah, and you'll feel a certain sense of security in that. And then if you really don't like doing what it is your dad does, then you always have the choice to rebel against it. But I think one of the problems we have these days is that everyone's on a flipping mission to figure out what they want to do with their lives. And it's like, well, who flipping knows?
Well, my family always followed the father. Like, I followed my father into the army. He followed his dad into the army. He followed his dad into the army. And my son's in the Navy, So we pretty much always followed our fathers. But then we had pretty good relationships with our fathers, which unfortunately a lot of children don't have so much these days. So you'd also have to address that issue. I mean, the thing I was going to say earlier was, like, my father got evacuated in World War II because his family lived in the middle of London. And in fact, his home got bombed flat in the Blitz in 1940. And he was evacuated a couple of times, but his favourite place was when he was evacuated to Wales and onto a farm. and he had a great time. Like the farm labourer there used to take him around places. He had to go to chapel on Sundays, which he wasn't all that keen on because it was in Welsh, but which he didn't understand, obviously. But he really liked helping with the harvest and all this kind of stuff. And the food, there was plentiful food because, you know, there were rabbits and all this kind of stuff around, even with the rationing.
But what do you think about the increasing technologization of all industries? So, I mean, like you just mentioned about like factory workers packing boxes or, you know, whatever they do. Eventually, those jobs probably aren't even going to exist.
Yeah, true enough.
So there is, I mean, I'm really quite worried about there's going to be this squeeze on sort of like the lower classes in terms of things that they can actually do, because they're going to be out-competed by, you know, robotics.
Yeah,
and this also applies for a lot of white-collar jobs, sort of admin jobs. I mean, this is all going to get eaten by software, a large proportion of it.
Yeah, well, a lot of that is women's work. A lot of those clerical jobs are actually women's jobs anyway, so I'm not really bothered about those very much, to be honest. But yeah, and because I think it would be a good thing to have less women in the workforce.
Okay, well, all right, here's an answer. I mean, there's always the human element. Some in that people would rather have their hair cut by a human than a machine.
Yeah, no, I don't think things
Sure.
like that are going to change.
Sure.
I think if you learn to be a barber, you're always going to have a job.
Yeah, or a waiter, or a barman.
Yeah, I suppose those sort of bloody things will still be around too. Yeah, fair enough. I don't see those ever ending totally, and certainly not people like chefs and cooks and so on. I think it comes back to what we were saying about people doing trades, because, you know, a chef, if you're a real chef, that's a skilled trade.
I mean, you take Tesco's, for example. They're replacing obviously the checkouts with machines.
Yeah,
I always go for the checkout if I'm given the choice. Sometimes there's no one there, so you got to check out on the machine yourself. But I hate doing it because I just think it's insulting. It's like, well, why have I got to do the work myself? You know, beeping this stuff and so on and so forth. So I think given the choice, people would rather interact with a human than a machine.
So do I, but I think ultimately, you won't really have checkouts. Ultimately, it'll all be machines, I guess.
I think eventually it will be delivered. Just be delivered by a self-driving van.
Drone.
I don't know. I'm worried. I hear this self-driving thing a lot, and I really can see a lot of practical difficulties with this self-driving stuff. I really can.
Yeah, I thought that, but what you got to understand, Duke, is they're going to build smart roads. This is the thing. When the cars first came out, people said there's no roads to drive them on, and then they built the roads, and it's the same for the smart.
But a smart road doesn't make smart pedestrians, for example. You're still going to have a little old lady walking out in front of a truck, and if it's got no driver on it, I reckon she's going to get hit.
I don't know about that. I mean, does that happen that often? I don't think so. People walking in front of cars. I don't know.
I think car accidents are pretty common, actually. Yeah.
I don't know how many people just walk in front of cars in the middle of the, of the road.
You get drivers like I don't know what it's like in the UK now at this moment, because the last time I was back there was a little few years ago. But like I know now, for example, like increasingly in Australia, people take no notice drivers of zebra crossings, and I don't know if that's because of the influx, particularly where I live at the moment, although I'm about to move, of large numbers of Chinese people, etc., who don't seem to understand what they're for. But
well, there's a solution right there: zebra crossings and pedestrian people will just learn. People will just learn.
People won't always use them, mate. They won't. People are not like that.
No, they won't, but the majority will, and they'll just push the technology through anyway.
I just think there's going to be huge problems with making self-driving trucks working in cities. I can see how they might well work on a motorway.
Right.
You know, I can see how they could get them to work there. But I think in cities, I really think we're quite a way off getting those in cities.
Why?
Yeah,
cities have slow-moving traffic.
Yeah, but they're also very, very complicated, and to try and
Not really. You can map you can map the entire terrain.
I'm reading this.
I see what you can, Sojo, but you can't allow for all the random things that are going to happen.
I'm reading this book right now called Surveillance Capitalism, which is written by. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, go on.
Well, anyway, it's written by some left-wing lady, but apparently it's a very popular book in 2019. But she's talking about how Google has been, at the forefront of pushing all this internet surveillance and so on and so forth. And one of the things that Google is doing is they're building smart cities. They've teamed up with Justin Trudeau, and they're doing it to Toronto, and they're basically turning the entire city into, you've got smart houses. Well, they're turning the entire city into a smart city. So I don't know the details of how that's going to work, but you're going to have sensors everywhere, cameras everywhere. Everything's going to be monitored, et cetera, et cetera. It's a Google city. They're even talking about building their own city. Google wants to build a city from the ground upwards, which is like a completely computerized city.
Well,
basically what the point I'm trying to get at is when it comes to cities are actually the ideal for this kind of Internet of Things and self-driverless cars and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I just think they're so chaotic that you're going to have loads and loads of accidents. I just do.
I think people will learn. People will learn to stay out of the way of the driverless truck.
I don't know. I think I just cannot see how they're going to get artificial intelligence intelligent enough to be able to deal with that stuff. I really don't.
Well, it might just be a case of there are certain roads that the driverless cars just don't go down. So you have certain main roads which go in and out of the industrial areas.
Yeah, I can see how they can do it on that.
And they're the smart roads. And there'll be certain roads which are just kind of like off limits for driverless cars, and there'll be kind of like a ghettoization of the highways.
Maybe. I mean, and certainly I know the elites want to stop private car ownership. I mean, that's perfectly obvious now. That's absolutely one of their aims, is they want to get rid of private car ownership because that will give them even more control of the plebs, which is us, basically. So
they don't want you flying, do they?
No, they don't want you doing anything. No,
international travel is out the window.
Yeah, I think they'd like to stop that. I think ultimately they want to stop people going into the countryside as well. I think that's going to be another thing they're aiming for, to be honest.
If they wanted,
I don't think so.
I think so. They already done it. They shut this country down. Was it 10 years ago? When did it happen? You weren't allowed to go in the countryside. What was that? That wasn't mad cow's disease. What was that? It was something else.
Well, it's this year even.
But it happened like 10 years ago. There was.
Well,
does anybody in the chat remember what I'm talking about? There was some pandemic. Foot and mouth disease.
Foot and mouth disease.
When was that? 2004? When was that?
Yeah, there's been several outbreaks, but I think that was the last big one.
But you literally weren't allowed to go into the countryside.
Brutus, where I live in Melbourne, okay, when the lockdown was on, and Melbourne had the longest and harshest lockdown of anywhere in the Western world, okay, and when the lockdown was on, and we've got a socialist, premier in Melbourne, okay, in Victoria. And we were not allowed to go more than 5 kilometers from our home. And they had around Melbourne what the Premier of Victoria described as a ring of steel. You were not allowed to go from Melbourne, the city, into the countryside.
Mm. Yeah.
And that was for months. So the idea that Sojourner can't see that they actually want to stop the plebs, including that's us, all of us. I know Sojourner hopes he rises above that stuff, and I hope
you're not
does,
picking on Sojo again, are you?
No, I'm not picking on Sojo. I'm just trying
you are a little bit.
Well, I'm not really, because I just think he should see that. Yeah, if the elites want more control than they have now,
I think
that includes on our travel.
I think you should see that the elites want driverless cars.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying they don't. So, Brutus, I wasn't saying they don't want that. Of course they do, because they wouldn't have to pay drivers. But I'm not suggesting that for a second. I'm just saying I think the technology is more difficult than people perhaps think it will be. But I accept, there are ways around it. And I'm sure 30, 40 years' time, when I'm dead and gone, there will be probably lots of driverless cars. But I just think that the elites want much more control than than Sojo can see at the moment.
Yeah.
And you just got to look at what they're doing with these lockdowns and what they're using them for. And you can see that they're even saying now, oh, no, get the bloody vaccine, no matter how dangerous and rushed it is, but take the vaccine and even take the vaccine at least twice. But you're still going to have to wear a mask. You still got to do social distancing. You still shouldn't travel. They're already saying this.
Yeah.
It's insane that people. It is insane that people cannot see what's going on, and the only way they will stop is if ordinary people rise up and say, "Fuck this shit, we're not doing it anymore."
Yeah, I was thinking about this last night. Actually, like, how are we going to get out of this situation? I think we need a backbench rebellion. I think that's the only way to do it. I mean, I like. It's very romantic to say the people rise up and they take to the streets, and it does have some effect. But I mean, I think
enough of them did it. If everyone, for example, said,
but
I'm not wearing a mask. If everyone just said, I'm not wearing a mask,
they're not doing it.
But if they did, even if half the people said, I'm not wearing a mask, right? Even if half the people did it, there is nothing whatever the authorities could do about it.
I don't even think, to be honest, not that I want to defend mask wearing, but it's not really the problem as far as I see it. The real problem, is the closing down of small businesses. If small businesses, if I could wear a mask to make sure that small businesses would stay open, I'd be happy to do that. I mean, I'm
sure that'll be an excuse that they'll use. But we know. Just look at the science. Viruses are too small for masks to stop.
Yeah.
So it's just a nonsense.
I agree, but I just don't think it should be the focus of debate, because the real problem here is shutting down small businesses, which is bankrupting the country. That's the problem. The mask itself. I mean, I'm just saying, like in the Orient, with the whole SARS outbreak, they all wore masks for like a year, and they were fine. They didn't bankrupt themselves because they still went to work. You know what I mean?
But first of all, they didn't all wear masks.
Okay.
In like Asian countries, some people wear masks, but the people who wear masks are usually people who are ill themselves. Okay, because they're wearing a mask to stop someone else catching something that they're ill from. That's the idea of, like, when you see Chinese and Japanese people wearing masks. And I've asked people who live in Japan and China about this. They wear masks when they're ill. Like, if they've got the flu, they'll wear a mask so they don't give it to more people, or they limit the number of people they'll give it to, let's say. That's why you see Asian people wearing masks. It isn't like because, we've got to stop this virus, which has got a 99.6% survival rate.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing you've got to get across to people. It's got a 99.6 survival rate. And I think it's less than 400 people in UK who are like ordinary age and not already very sick have died from it. It's nonsense.
Yeah, I know. I mean, just to bring it back to what I was going to say, I think the real solution is you need a backbench revolt, because we're not going to just storm Parliament and overthrow the government. And so, unfortunately, we're stuck with this Tory government for the next 4 years.
You could have people saying, look, I'm not taking any notice of these damn lockdown rules.
Yeah, okay. Or we could force the Tories to get rid of Boris and have a leadership challenge within the Tory parties. And so all you really need is a majority of backbenchers to say, fuck you, Boris, you've messed this up completely. And then we get rid of Boris, and then we stop the lockdowns. So, I mean, that would be the most practical way.
I don't see Boris being there for the next general election, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that would be the most practical way of solving this problem, I think. And in order to do that, you've got to target Tory MPs and target the backbenchers and lionize them and urge them to action. Otherwise, it's just a case of people on the internet screaming, saying, we've got to do something. And it's like, well, what? I mean, you
fire the government edicts on the lockdown for a start.
Yeah, but there is a government that these MPs are paid to listen to the general public. They have surgeries. They have Twitter accounts. They have email accounts. They are paid to listen to us. So instead of just like, you know,
I think we've got to kick the Tories out and get in nationalist populist parties, not the Conservatives. That's what I think.
But that is a long-term goal, right? We need a solution now in 2021.
But didn't the backbenchers actually say to the government, you can't do a national lockdown without another vote? And so the government brought in this tier, and they brought in this tier system so they could do a national lockdown without another vote.
Exactly. Well, it's a case of cup half full or cup half empty. I mean, what that proves to me is that there are a lot of backbenchers which are on our side, and they want to put an end to this business. So you just need to get more of them, and you need to get a majority. You need a leadership challenge. You need to get rid of Boris, and then we can solve the problem.
Yeah, we've certainly got to get rid of Alexander Boris Johnson for certain. Okay, look, I'm not against that if we can do it. But yeah, fair enough.
I'm just talking about specifically a specific targeted plan of action instead of just flailing your hands in the air and saying, rebellion. It's like, okay, I mean, that's good and everything. But
I think you can do both.
You can do both, but I think
I never wore a mask in Melbourne. You were always supposed to. Every time you went outside your house, even when you were on your own, you're supposed to wear a mask. I never wore one. I just never did.
Yeah.
So and if more people had done that, the lockdown would have lasted less long.
What do you think, Sojo?
Well, I mean, therein lies the problem, because I look at, Duke was just saying about trying to convince people about the lethality of this virus. I've had this conversation with my parents, and I don't get anywhere with it. I can talk until I'm blue in the face about the fact that it's only people who are, over the age of 80. It's only people who are sick already that this thing affects. It doesn't work.
Because people are dim. It must be because just people are dim. They can't see it.
But that may be the case. But this is the landscape that we're presented with. And then I look at like the polling, what people think about having a lockdown. I'm afraid to say that most people are for it. Yeah,
and they don't work. It's obviously they don't work because we wouldn't still be having them if they worked. But it's Japan did the sensible thing. They just closed their borders because they said, there's a couple of supposedly new versions of this, one of which is supposedly British. And the other one, I think, is supposed to be South African. And Japan just said, okay, well, no one who's not Japanese and a full-time resident here can come into Japan. Britain doesn't do that. They leave their borders open and stop the public in Britain from moving around, which is insane.
I don't know what to tell you, though. It's like, yes, this may well be the truth, but it doesn't matter because, the truth doesn't wash with the public.
Yeah.
So,
because they're brainwashed sheep. Brainwashed sheep.
Wow. I don't know what to say. That's what they are.
Yep. Obviously. Can I just answer a question? Susie, the reason I say Alexander Boris Johnson is that no one who knows Alexander Boris Johnson calls him Boris. All of his friends and family call him Al for Alexander. Boris Johnson is a made-up name, like most of his character, apparently. Character in inverted commas, because I don't think he's really got one. So that's why I say Alexander Boris Johnson. Sorry, guys, didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so like I'm saying, I mean, I just don't see favorable conditions to even get what we want, because actually the general public and the majority of MPs actually support what the government are doing.
Yep. I kind of despair. I have to say I do.
I just, you just have to sort of think about it as being it's a long war and there's many battles, and some of them you will win and some of them you will lose. And
I mean, I think Brutus is right. We should put pressure on MPs. I'm not saying we shouldn't put pressure on MPs. I just think, like you said, we need to take like multiple moves against it in every way we can.
I just think. So I was just making a coffee. I just think we should think more like the left wing and more like the bin lids, and instead of having, I mean, of course, the left wing does do mass demonstrations. They do that, but I don't even think that's how they get stuff done. I think they really get stuff done by specific targeted lobbying. That's how. It's a combination of the two, but I mean, I think the targeted lobbying is very successful. And I think on the right, for some reason, it's like everybody seems to talk about mass demonstrations, but they kind of skip the idea of targeted lobbying altogether because I hate the Tory party. I hate them. I fucking hate them. Well, we've got to replace them. And it's like, okay, well, they run the country and you can write to them and tell them what to do. So maybe we should try doing that. So I just think, focus on the backbenchers, make it very, very clear to them that we want them to break the lockdown and get them to do it. Because I said this, I made a video about this, right? What did I say? We should gripe at the Tory party. It's like people waste their time chasing after random personalities on the internet or journalists or whatever, and it's like, well, you got literal members of parliament sitting there. They've all got Twitter accounts. Sure. Why don't you write to them? Yeah,
no, I think that's worth doing. I mean, whether it will make any difference, I don't know, but I think we've got to pursue multiple avenues of attack. Ataman, what's your opinion on this stuff?
All right.
Morning, Ataman.
Morning. Did any of you notice before Boris Johnson was elected, they kept coming out and protesting about this and that and everything, and the government would appease them on everything. And then it was like they were pushing on an open door. And then when Boris Johnson got in, and they came out to protest Boris Johnson being elected that night, and they got a very stiff response, and all of that open door policy was suddenly shut.
Who's they?
Just people that are against the Tory government. Your sort of typical grassroots Labour people,
right?
And it was just kind of. I mean, that kind of shows you that Tony Blair was right when he says that the Tory party is just there to rule, and they will appease you to appease these guys on everything, but except them, not being in power. But also, it kind of, I think, shows you that how much they are just part of the system as much as everyone else.
I think we've got to get a combination of traditional conservative voters and socially conservative traditional Labour voters, and we've got to say to both those groups, listen, guys, what you got to do is you've got to stop voting Conservative or Labour. You've got to switch your votes to patriotic, populist kinds of parties. Oh, listen, I think that's another thing we've got to work on. Is we've got to work on all of these nationalist, populist parties in the UK. And like I was saying the other day, there's like at least 12, and we need some forms of at least like some sort of alliance between them, so they don't run against each other. And that's the other thing we've got to push on. If I think about what I want to do with my channel in 2021, it's that I want to push for nationalist parties to form some sort of an alliance, nationalist/populist parties, and also to push for traditional Labour voters and traditional Conservative voters both to stop supporting Labour and Conservatives, because that's the only chance we've got of getting any change through the parliamentary system.
I don't think we really need to worry about how many parties there are, though, because just like in the woods, one tree gets ahead of the others and then just takes up all the sunlight.
Maybe. I just think that it would be easier for voters as well as for the parties.
That's a good one.
Yeah, no, it is a good one, but I still think it would be easier for the parties and for voters if at least they had the sort of loose alliance that would say, okay, we're not going to run against each other in seats.
Yeah, but you do
because they're going after the same votes, basically. So I don't really care which one of them stands in each seat, but only one of them should stand.
I still don't know who these sort of mythical 12 parties are. You keep mentioning it, but I can't. Who are they?
So how many
Right.
how many
Yeah.
do you know of, Sojo?
Okay, I'll go through the ones that I know of.
Go on.
UKIP.
UKIP, Britain First, Brexit
Brexit.
Party, SDP. That's it.
For
Really.
Britain.
For
Well,
Britain.
they're not even a registered party.
No, for Britain. They are a registered party.
I said for Britain. You made
No,
me
you
think of Britain First.
Yeah, no, but I'm not talking about Britain First. I'm talking about for Britain. You know, Anne-Marie Waters' party.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Anne-Marie Waters, the SDP, who aren't even really, they're not even really nationalist. The Brexit Party, UKIP.
I'm not talking. By the way, I'm not talking about the SNP in the sense of the Scottish Nationalist Party. I would not advise anyone to vote for them, mostly, especially Scottish people. So,
Yes, so I've just listed off 4 parties, and I can't think of anyone else.
The Heritage
Hang on.
Party.
You got the you got
Heritage 5.
there's
Heritage
the
Party,
the Democrats,
Lawrence Fox's party.
and the
Reclaim
Democrats.
Party.
Yeah, the Democrats.
Who are the Democrats?
The guys who that Labour bloke, that Brutus, you were talking about him the other day, and actually he's just done a video that's on YouTube at the moment. I can't remember his name. He's an ex-Labour guy, but he supports is it the English Democrats or just the Democrats? I can't remember now.
But many of these that you're citing are sort of non-parties that they're
No,
never...
they are actually parties. These ones. I'm not talking
Yeah, but
about
they're non-parties though. They're never gonna. They're just fringe bit pieces that don't go anywhere.
Okay,
The English Democrats haven't gone anywhere for a long time.
Yeah, okay, but my point is, all of those guys, and there are others as well, but all of those guys need to have some sort of alliance where they don't run against each other. So that even these
you also
little
forgot
parties,
to mention. You also forgot to mention the National Front, the BNP, which
there is. Yep.
But
there's
then,
those two.
no, yeah, but who's good? Did the NF even run any candidates?
Yeah,
And
they
the
still-
BNP is a dead entity basically that's just there for collecting money from wills.
Well, it's still there. It's a thing,
And of course, one of the sorry to interrupt, but one of the big problems is that that's a broad church that can't be united. You're not going to unite UKIP with the BNP and NF. It's just not going to happen.
yeah.
But you could certainly unite all the others apart from the NF and the BNP.
I got to say, I'm with Ataman on this one, Duke. I'm sorry. I think you underestimate how hard-headed and combative and just non-cooperative the leaders of these little parties are.
Yeah, I don't underestimate that. I can see it. And as someone said the other day, Jonathan Bowden said it's like herding cats. And yeah, I agree with all that. But it's still the thing I'm going to advocate for. I'm not saying we'll win, but it's something I think, as responsible nationalists, we should be urging.
You need another UKIP. UKIP was the thing, and it got destroyed.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all. I really don't. Although I am not. I mean, I think Nigel Farage is easily the most electable figure, you know. But I'm not totally happy with where he stands on a lot of this stuff. But on the other hand, you know, beggars can't be choosers, sadly.
Exactly.
I think it has to be understood though. There was a dual dynamic going on there with UKIP. I mean, UKIP did threaten the Tory party. They got 4 million votes, 2015, and that's why David Cameron gave us the referendum. That's why the whole Brexit.
Well, it's the only reason we got the referendum
was pushed forward. But it's not just UKIP. It was a combination of the outside force of UKIP and the internal force of Eurosceptics and backbenchers in the Tory party and grassroots within the Tory party.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was a combination of those two factors. So even though we've lost UKIP, we've still got the Eurosceptics and the backbenchers and the grassroots within the Tory party.
But they're a minority of the Conservative Party. That's the trouble.
Yep.
Well, that's all we've got, though. So you have to play the hand that you're dealt. Unfortunately.
Yeah, no. Listen, I'm not saying we shouldn't go in, but like I said, I'm in favour of pushing forward on all fronts. So yeah, if you can get more Eurosceptic Conservative MPs elected, fine. And if you can push them into doing things which are actually good for the British people, that's fine too. I'm not saying we shouldn't do those as well. But I think the basic thing we've got to push for as nationalists, and it's certainly what I'm going to be pushing for, is that we've got to stop traditional Conservative voters voting Conservative and traditional Labour voters voting Labour, although actually that was happening anyway.
You need your Tory entryism, though, don't you? Because, I mean, obviously, like, no nationalist party is going to get elected, but you need, because when the Tories move to the right to absorb whatever escaped voters they have, you need people in there to catch that momentum.
Yeah, I'm not against Conservative entryism. I think the Conservative Party is set up to stop it, but yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, dude.
Listen, none of this is easy. You know, it's like bloody Colin Liddell said to me. You know, no one said this would be easy. It's like it's not. It's difficult. It's like pushing crap uphill. But you have to do it because otherwise we're just going to carry on the same course and we're going to be destroyed.
Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. Anyway, you know my opinion.
Five Liver in the chat. I don't agree with that at all. PA is a complete cul-de-sac and a waste of time for British nationalists.
That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying.
Hang on.
If you read it.
Oh, well, he's saying Colette is a counter-signaling. Yeah, fair enough, Five Liver. I beg your pardon. I misunderstood what you were saying there. Yeah, I think Colette is either a bad actor or an idiot, or maybe both. But there we go.
I think Five Liver is a follower of the lesbian party, unfortunately.
Well, I used to say I was a lesbian trapped in a male body, but there we go.
I don't think anyone needs to worry about PA as much as people do, though. I mean, like, people say they're going to split the right, but you kind of need a place for the sort of the Wignati maniacs to go that gets them away from the serious work. And there's loads of people who follow PA who just think, well, this is the best we've got, so I'm going to stick with it, and they'll shift if something better comes along.
Yeah, fair enough. I think you're possibly right about that, Adam. And yeah, fair enough. I mean, at least if they're in PA, we can say, okay, they're all in that, like, they're all in that toilet over there. So, you know.
Yeah, it's like they've been herded into this ghetto and they've been like out the way, and that we don't have to worry about them anymore.
Yeah, good point. That's a good. You know, I think that.
I do wish they would just be more open and honest about the fact that they are fascists, though, because it is. I mean, it's obviously I'm not fascist, but it is kind of a legitimate school of thought in that it does have its own history, its own leaders, its own.
In Italy and Germany, yeah.
Well, I mean, we've got Oswald Mosley. You've got many.
Always a minority bloke, even in the 1930s. He was very much a minority.
You've got Oswald Mosley. You've got the National Front. You've got the BNP. There is a history of this kind of thing in this country, and so I just wish they'd be more open and honest and just say, yeah, we are Oswald Mosleyites. We are fascists. This is what we believe in, and then you can have like a proper conversation with them. But right now, it's just a case of they pretend. I don't even know where they stand actually, because they say they're not civic nationalists. They're very anti-English, but at the same time, they deny that they're fascists. So it's like, well, what are you? I mean, you're just in this limbo land.
Yeah, listen. I what I've read of Oswald Mosley, and I've read a little bit about him, not a great deal, because I don't find him a very interesting character myself. But what I've read about him, he was more a kind of Mussolini-style fascist than he was a Adolf Hitler Nazok.
Yeah, probably.
So they're even wrong about that in that sense, because there was a huge difference. I mean, I know the left don't get this, or at least pretend not to get this, but there was an enormous difference between Mussolini-style fascism and Hitler-style National Socialism.
The thing that gets me is that after the Second World War, Mosley was in favor of he didn't call it the European Union, but he wanted a united Europe, didn't he? I mean, so he's basically...
Well, you could say Colette's probably on that path, because he certainly doesn't believe in Britain, does he? I mean, he constantly just goes on about the white race, whatever the fuck that is. So, you know.
Yeah. So it's kind of like almost a forerunner of the European Union himself, which is Yeah, it's kind of hilarious. So there you go.
But yeah, Mosley, from what I've read, was no great admirer of Adolf Hitler, really.
Didn't he go to his wedding?
He might have done, but I mean, hang on, whose wedding?
Mosley's wedding.
Oh, Hitler? No, I don't think so.
I think he did.
What, in England?
No, tell me in the chat, someone. Am I right or wrong?
Did Mosley get married in England, or did he get married on the continent?
I think he got married and he got divorced. He married a new lady. And
Because if he got married in England, then Hitler certainly didn't go, because Hitler certainly never came to England.
Well, there are rumors that he went to Liverpool.
Yeah, I'm sure there are rumors, but I don't think they're true. But yeah, okay.
There's a whole story. Actually, I posted this recently. There's a whole story about Hitler went to Liverpool, got a girl pregnant, and I don't know, the son disappeared. Apparently, Hitler had a brother, and his brother married an Irish girl and had 3 sons. And they live in America now. They're still alive to this day.
Well, that's conceivable, but I don't think Adolf Hitler ever came to the UK.
They changed their name, apparently, which I just think is just, I don't know, a fantastic piece of history. You think Hitler got married in Newcastle. You'd think the neo-Nazis would be all over it. But
yeah,
they're not. Yeah. So there you go.
I don't know. I just say politically, I think Mosley was closer to Mussolini than he was to Hitler, but that's beside the point. Mosley was never going to get anywhere in the UK any more than any other Nazi or fascist organization is ever going to get anywhere in the UK. I don't care even if you think the ideology is okay. They're just never going to get anywhere. It's a complete waste of time.
Why?
And effort. Because people will never support that in the UK. They just won't. There's hardly a family in the land that didn't have a grandfather or great-grandfather who fought against those guys.
No, I'm just saying, but pre-war Mosley, did he not have a chance with the black shirts?
No, I don't think he did. He listen, I know a little bit about this because my grandfather, although he was a senior NCO in the British Army, when he left the British Army, he rejoined again when the war started. When he wasn't in the army, he was a full-on Union guy. And there were enormous punch-ups sometimes between the black shirts and people. And yeah, okay, there were Jewish immigrants in the East End who got into fights with them, but there were British people too.
Hang on. Your uncle,
my grandfather.
Sorry, your grandfather was a Union guy.
When he wasn't in the British Army, yes, he was.
What's a Union guy? I mean, trade union.
Trade union, yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Right.
He was a big supporter of trade unions when he wasn't in the British Army.
Right, and they had
he thought Churchill was a warmonger. He didn't like Churchill.
Right.
But on the other hand, when Britain gave India independence in 1947, he thought it was the worst thing Britain had ever done because he'd served in India. So he was a contradictory man in some respects, let us say.
Yeah. All right, then. I'm going to ask the panel. I'm going to ask the panel one by one. Mosley, hero or traitor? Ataman.
Hero.
Duke?
Neither. Somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between. So, Joe?
Misguided is what I'd say.
I don't have an opinion.
Everyone wants to avoid the Mosley question because they don't want a torrent of Spurgs screaming at them.
I actually don't know anything about it.
I'm not avoiding it. I just think he was misguided.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I think he was misguided. I think he probably thought he was a patriot, but I think he was misguided.
I mean, in defense of Mosley, I guess I'd say that he did order his black shirts to fight in the war. So there you go. When push came to shove, he was loyal to his country. So I guess I'd have to say hero.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But they paint him these days as some kind of pro-Hitler person, you know? So it's all twisted out of shape, I suppose.
I will make one point. I remember reading an article or a piece on Mosley, but he could have been a successful Labour MP, and he kind of threw that all away. So I think that's just something to sort of think on.
United Valkyrie Mitford in the chat says Mosley married at Goebbels' house in 1936. Adolf Hitler was a guest of honor. So there you go.
Well, there you go. I'm perfectly willing to believe that, but as long as it wasn't in England, because I know Hitler never came to England.
Well, he got married twice, didn't he? Oh, just look up the Wikipedia.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying he never came to Hitler never came to England.
Well, he did. He went to Liverpool.
No, he didn't. But anyway,
He did. He went to Liverpool.
no, he never went to Liverpool. He didn't like the Irish.
He was a Scouser. Hitler was a Scouser.
I'm sorry, that was not fair. I've known some good guys from Liverpool actually, but anyway.
So Hitler, it says on his Wikipedia article, he married Lady Cynthia Curzon in England, and he later married Diana Mitford. So Lady Cynthia Curzon
would have been Curzon's one of the
hundreds of guests,
the very superior person.
Yeah, well, I think from what I remember, it's been a while since I've read about it. People were quite cynical, and they thought he was just marrying her for wealth and name and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
and apparently, I think he ended up banging her sister, didn't he? So he was having an affair on the side. But anyway, whatever. Hundreds of guests included King George and Queen Mary. So there you go. And then later on, Cynthia dies of peritonitis.
Peritonitis, yeah.
Right, after which Mosley married his mistress, Diana Guinness. They married in secret in Germany.
Another heiress.
Yeah, well, there you go. On October, secretly in Germany on 6th of October 1936, in the Berlin home of Germany's Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. Adolf Hitler was the guest of honor.
Well, there you go.
So there you go.
That didn't do him much good, did it?
Well, it was before the war, so I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I have mixed.
Brutus, what year was that?
1936.
Oh, okay. So it was like 3 years after Hitler came to power. Fair enough.
Yeah. So, yeah, okay.
I don't think that's a recommendation for Mosley at all, to be honest with you.
What gets me is he crossed the floor to condemn the black and tans. That's what gets me about Mosley.
Yeah, yeah. But don't forget, also, it's fair enough to say that like the Irish independence movement and the old IRA had some fascistic elements in them.
Yeah.
You know, they did. Like Ireland has more of a kind of sort of alliance with fascism than UK ever did.
Well, I mean, we could get Dragon Energy on this and on here. And
oh God, please not.
He'd explain it in depth, but he seems to think National Socialism started in Ireland. But,
I'm sure he did. But no, I just think that like there were fascistic elements in the old IRA, like the provisional IRA. That was around in Northern Ireland like for 30 years in the towards the end of the 20th century. Those guys were mostly Marxists, at least the guys who were not just out and out gangsters. The guys who thought about it were Marxists, and that's proven today when Sinn Féin in Southern Ireland is completely globo homo and wants mass immigration into Ireland because they're Marxists.
I mean, the thing I could say in defense of him condemning the black and tans is maybe he saw the Irish as British citizens, and so he thought they were hurting British citizens. So we did.
Except they weren't, of course. The Irish didn't look at themselves in that way. And my mother was from Southern Ireland, and they certainly didn't look at themselves as British citizens in like 1921.
Right.
So
yeah, scrolling,
but not most.
Scrolling down the Wikipedia article, this show has now become Brutus reading Wikipedia, so that's good. But scrolling down, Mosley and his wife Cynthia were committed Fabians. Oh,
whoa! Wolves in sheep's clothing. Wolves in sheep's clothing, eh? But then it just goes to prove that something that I've been convinced of for ages. You know, National Socialists were not called National Socialists for nothing.
Well, this is it. And, you say to these fascists, you say, I don't believe I'm social. And they say, I'm not a socialist. I'm a fascist. It's different.
And then you look at what they believe in, and it's all basically all the same.
Yeah. It's some kind of, I mean, we had this out with Dragon Energy, but it's some kind of, it's some weird kind of smoke and mirrors move where it's like they say, we follow the third position. We're not socialists. We're not capitalists. We're fascists, right? But when you get down to it, you find out their fascism actually is just socialism. And they sit there and they will pour scorn on capitalism and say how bad and evil it is and blah, blah, blah. But then they'll end up defending Karl Marx. So it's like you try and escape from the capitalist socialist dichotomy, and you get into this third position, and then you just get sucked back into the socialist position.
Yeah, and look at Mussolini. Look at Mussolini and the founders of fascism in Italy. They were all former Marxists or former socialists, all of them.
Yeah.
And like I think you can. There are people who totally change their position as they get older or what have you. There are, but like most people don't. Most people's position shifts a bit, but it doesn't totally reverse.
Yeah, I always forget the name of that guy. Who's the father of fascism? The philosopher?
Isn't he Antonio somebody or other?
Antonio. Oh,
I can picture him. He's a guy with glasses. Yeah,
Gentile. That's it.
Yeah,
he wrote So you look at that guy's hair. He's got the same haircut as David Duke. I'm not even joking.
Yeah, no, I believe you. I know.
Here it is. Here's his name. Giovanni Gentile.
Yeah, I think I've heard that before, yeah.
Because I always wondered why David Duke's got this stupid haircut. And it's like, oh.
Dr. David Duke.
Yeah. I mean, it's all hidden in plain sight, isn't it? It's like, Mark Collett turns up to his show every week wearing a flipping black shirt.
Yeah,
David Duke's got the Giovanni.
Hang on, Bruce. What we have to say is, though, Mark Collett does have time to play video games live on YouTube.
Well, I'm not against that. That's all right.
Oh, come on, man! Not as the leader of a supposed political party. Give me a break.
That's okay.
I mean, I fucking detest Alexander Boris Johnson, but if he really came on YouTube playing some stupid video game, I would really laugh, Come on.
It's the 21st century. It's okay.
Oh, fine. Play them in private.
I think it's okay. No problem. That's how men interact these days. They play games. They play video games. That's just the way it is. Like in the past, leaders of parties would play, I don't know, polo or cricket or something.
Yeah, or they might write histories of the English-speaking people or something, really childish like that. I don't know, man. I just think the guy's a joke, but there we go.
Yeah,
I got nothing against people who've got like video gaming channels. I follow one or two of them. If they're doing historical games, I don't mind. But like the idea that someone who is leading supposedly a serious political movement could sit playing video games, it's amusing to me. Utterly ridiculous.
I was reading a great article the other day about the Fabian Society, but I can't find it. But wolf in sheep's clothing, isn't it?
That's their logo, isn't it?
Well, no, that was originally their logo, and then they changed it to that's what I was thinking. They changed it to a picture of a tortoise, and the motto is "When I strike hard." And I don't know if you can be bothered to do the screen share, Duke, but I mean, if you can, in London, they had a huge flying tortoise, didn't they, for New Year's? And
I'll believe you. I'm sure people can picture a flying tortoise.
But no, it's not fireworks. It's drones, but they're colored drones, and so they fly in the sky and they form a particular formation. So these colored drones, they formed the image of a tortoise, and on the back of the tortoise they had a tortoise or a turtle. Anyway, I don't know, whatever. I don't know, one of the T's. But anyway, they had a image of Africa, right? The continent of Africa.
Lovely.
And then I can't remember exactly what happened. But anyway, you have to look at it. But yeah, that's Fabian imagery. When I
Well,
strike
they're very bad people. If you look at the people who were involved with the Fabian movement, basically they're very bad people as far as I'm concerned. Like in terms of like what they did with Britain. Because none of them I admire in the least degree. Everything they did was pretty bad for the British people.
Oh yeah, I found it now. This is a great. Oh yes, this is a great article I found. Somebody shared this with me. Anyway, there you go.
All right, guys, I got another question, and this is partly because I was talking to the Franklin in his chat the other day, and he's going to come on my stream at some point. Who is the Franklin? In my view, is probably the best reactionary Australian YouTuber there is, and he. Well, I was discussing something in the chat, and we were talking about when was Western civilization at its height. And my argument was it was probably about 1900. And the descent began with 1914-18, the First World War. It accelerated considerably after 1945, and then it just went into free fall up from about 1965 onwards. And I was wondering what you guys thought about that. When was the height of Western civilization? Or British civilization, if you prefer.
It's the Edwardian age, as you say, or in France they called it the Belle Époque, and in America they called it the Gilded Age, didn't they?
Yeah,
I'd agree with that.
I thought the Gilded Age was the 1920s.
No, that was the Jazz Age.
Huh?
Yeah, I would have thought that. Flappers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, 1870 to 1900.
Yeah.
I'd say that was kind of the height of Western, or if you like, Anglo civilization. I think that was the height of it. And it's been downhill certainly since 1418.
Yeah. I posted a link in the chat to this article. I thought it was great. I'm just going to read from it. But Fabian members included H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, Sidney Webb, a bunch of other people I don't remember.
Three people I don't like straight away. Good.
Tony Blair.
4.
Hey?
4.
Yeah, well, Tony Blair, I'll go on to hatred rather than don't like, but yeah. Okay.
Here we go. Fabian Societies founded the British Labour Party. I knew that. London School of Economics. I knew that. Apparently, the International Court of Justice at The Hague, and were largely involved in the creation of the UN and the League of Nations.
Wonderful.
You know, I got to be honest with you. I knew about the Fabian Society for a long time, but I haven't placed much emphasis on it in recent years because there aren't enough Jews in it. So I decided to ignore it. I thought, no, I'm not going to talk about Fabians. It's not. I remember
it's a conspiracy, the Fabian Society. There's no Jews in there.
It's not a real conspiracy.
Brutus, there's my other thing for 2021 that my channel's going to be pushing is let's please get away from blaming everything on Super Jews.
Yeah, let's blame things on the Fabian Society more and the Jews.
Yeah, absolutely right.
I'll go for
you know, they also had missions that used to go around places like the East End and Bermondsey, where I was born, although years before I was born, of course, where they were actually trying to turn people into big-time union blokes and like socialists and all this kind of shit.
Talking about the Fabian Society.
Yeah, they used to have. This comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. They even had like alternatives to Sunday school, shall we say, where they used to try and propagandize working class kids.
Yeah.
So they were completely bad as far as I was concerned. Like I would say, okay, George Bernard Shaw, he could write pretty well. And the same goes for H.G. Wells, but neither of them do I like as people.
Didn't H.G. Wells write a book called The New World Order or something like that? I'm sure
He wrote War of the Worlds.
Yeah, he did write War of the Worlds.
he did write a
Time
book
Machine.
called. Eh? No, I
And
know
Time
that.
Machine. All
He
right.
did write a book on the New World Order, though, didn't he? Pretty sure he did.
He was into that stuff. He was into that stuff. You know, like he imagined bombing attacks on cities like with airships rather than aircraft. And he did obviously the Time Machine and other well-known stories. But if you look at the stories and the morals behind them, they're almost always pretty anti-British, really. Even with War of the Worlds.
Right.
Like War of the World's central thing is that, you know, the mighty British Empire and the Royal Navy is useless against these Martians. That's their actual. That's the actual moral behind it. And then, of course, they die because of a cold.
Well, I mean, forerunner to COVID, right? But wasn't that one of the world's great kind of propaganda kind of what would you call it? Mass hysteria experiments, War of the Worlds, because they did a radio show of it and they played.
That was what's his name? The well-known American actor. I can't remember his name. One of you guys all know.
But they pretend people actually thought it was
Kane and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
they thought it was a real thing. I mean, there was like a serious people in America in the 1920s or whenever they did it.
Yeah.
They thought, oh my God, the Martians have landed, because they did a radio show. It was Orson Welles. They did a radio show as if it was a real kind of a news program or whatever. So
and what's the difference between Americans in the 20s believing that and most people in the Western world today believing in COVID-19 is a desperately dangerous illness when it's got a 99.6% survival rate? It's pretty similar, really, if you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah. I never got the deal with George Bernard Shaw. Who the fuck is this guy? Irish playwright, polemicist, influence on Western theatre, extended from blah blah, Man and Superman. I don't know. What is this?
Pygmalion, and Pygmalion's very well known. They turned it into a pretty good film in the 1930s, I think, which is about this posh guy gets hold of this working class flower seller girl and turns her into a lady, and then falls in love with her.
I remember that. I've seen an English movie about that.
It's a pretty good film, but it's a socialist story basically.
Oh, Pygmalion. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also did he did a Julius Caesar and Cleopatra thing, which is pretty well known too. Also been made into a movie, which again is subversive.
Yeah. Expressed admiration for both Mussolini and Stalin.
Yep. What a surprise.
Yeah, this is what gets me on this article. It says, since Shaw's death, he has been regularly rated amongst British dramatists as second only to Shakespeare. And I'm like, who the fuck is this guy?
And who are British dramatists? Left-wingers, almost like to a man or woman.
Second to Shakespeare,
I think that's a huge overrating, but there we go. But he and again, like he admired Mussolini and Stalin. Well, what a surprise, because Mussolini and Stalin had certain things in common. Five Live, yes, Tommy Steele was from Bermondsey, and he was fucking detested in Bermondsey when I was a kid.
Haven't they always wheeled out the Shakespeare comparisons every time like a socialist playwright comes along? They're the best things since Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Well,
don't get me wrong. He writes very good English. You can't say he doesn't, but everything he writes is pretty subversive. If you're looking at it from the point of view when he wrote it, so you're looking when Britain was still a great empire and all the rest of it. Everything is anti-British, basically, and certainly the anti the British social system.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, Alphabet, Taxon, Zcat. I think H.G. Wells was in favour of eugenics. Yes.
I think Bowden was right when he said that the left wing these days or the left wing lovies and darlings in the theatre industry, or thespians, I should say, they're at war with the text, aren't they? When it comes to Shakespeare,
Oh yeah.
They know that he's great, and they can't just dismiss him or get rid of him because he's too deeply ingrained in our culture. And so what they do is they just keep doing reinterpretations of his plays, and they just try and, I don't know, push the sexism and the racism out, I suppose.
Yeah.
But fail miserably.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, and they don't do any other playwright really from that kind of era, when actually there were quite a lot of playwrights around at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, what was that one? Coffee and Boys? Was there Marlowe? Was it Marlowe?
Christopher Marlowe, yeah.
Christopher Marlowe, yeah.
Killed in a pub fight in Deptford, I believe.
Oh, really?
He was another Elizabethan one, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was what?
He was
another
killed in
Elizabethan playwright.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Elizabethan England was a pretty violent place. You know the term that they use in movies, swashbuckler. Yeah?
Right. Yeah.
That comes from that era, because a buckle was a small shield that a guy could wear on his belt, only a bit bigger than your hand, and you would have your sword and your buckler, which was actually a traditional British fighting thing that went back 200 years before that. And like everyone would walk around with that kind of stuff, you know. And it was quite a violent society. And Marlowe, I think it was Marlowe, was killed in a pub fight in Deptford.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were going to ask earlier which do you think was the best period for the West? Well, for me, it's Elizabethan.
Yeah, Elizabethan wasn't bad. I certainly think it was the beginning of the rise of Britain as a great nation. Although maybe you could go back to the kind of Henry V and Agincourt as the real beginning of that. But the real beginning of Britain as like a world power was certainly under Elizabeth I, for sure.
Wasn't it a bit dark and dingy, though, in Elizabethan times?
What, people like Sir Francis Drake and all those guys? No.
I don't know. People were really short, though, weren't they?
No,
they weren't.
That wasn't true, actually. We were actually really close to the height we are now in the Elizabethan time.
Absolutely. It was only when people got very industrialized and as a result got bad nutrition that British people became shorter. And even then it wasn't true in the countryside. It was only in the cities.
Yeah.
Like if you join, for example, the Guards in the 1890s, you had to be 6 foot. You don't have to be 6 foot now. I think it's 5'10".
Oh, right. Okay.
But in the night, if you joined the Guards like in 1890 or something, you had to be 6 foot tall. And there were plenty of 6 foot tall guys around. They just didn't generally come from the middle of big industrial cities. They were guys from the countryside, mostly.
I mean, I did say Edward Longshanks was a tall guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, and English longbowmen were big, powerful blokes.
Yeah.
You had to be, because you couldn't pull a bloody 200-pound pull weight longbow unless you were.
Yeah.
Adamant's entirely right. The English guys, like in the late medieval era and the Renaissance era, were actually about the same size as we are now.
Do you think then there's a bit of a conspiracy just to undermine the Middle Ages and just say that, you know, it was all just mud and people didn't live for very long and they were short and they were malnourished and so on and so forth?
Yeah, none of which is necessarily true. Absolutely.
And a lot of that comes from the Enlightenment as well. I mean, it's the same as like with the Spanish Inquisition. Like it was nowhere near as bad. In fact, a lot of the imagery they attribute to the Spanish Inquisition was actually imagery from pagans killing Christian proselytizers.
Yeah, and sometimes that was exaggerated in the Roman Empire as well by the same people.
Yeah.
But like Christians weren't constantly persecuted by the ancient Romans. They were persecuted occasionally, and usually because they just wouldn't say, "Okay, well, the emperor is a great guy," you know.
Did any of you see the most recent Ben-Hur movie?
No, I didn't watch that. It didn't look very good. What was it like, Alan?
I only watched it the other night, and it's they really paint the Romans with like a really negative caricature.
Yeah, well, that's usually what they do, and they have done for a long time, to be honest with you.
They really lay it on them in that film, like really heavily.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I just like you've got the letters between is it Seneca? I'm trying to remember now. The younger one, not the older one who died when Pompeii was destroyed by the volcano, but his son who survived. There's one who's the elder and one who's the younger. I don't think he is Seneca. I think it's another guy. But anyway, he became a governor of a Roman province, and he would write to the Roman emperor, who was the brilliant Trajan at the time, who made the Roman Empire the biggest it ever was, beat the shit out of the Persians and everybody. This guy was writing to Trajan, and he said, "Look, I've got this new weirdo sect called Christians, and should I like prosecute them and like either like send them to prison or execute them?" And Trajan said, "No, what you got to do is give them every single chance to turn around and say, no, the Roman Emperor is the top bloke and all the rest of it. If they say that, just let them go." He didn't want them persecuted at all, any more than, I mean, you had in that system to say that the Roman Emperor was the greatest bloke. But as long as you said that, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
So the Romans only occasionally persecuted Christians. The Christians quite heavily persecuted pagans when they got into power.
Oh God, yeah.
So and I'm like I'm reasonably sympathetic to Christians and pagans, because like, as I say, I'm an atheist, but I'm not like a diehard atheist or any sort of militant atheist or anything like that. Like, people can make their own mind up, and I could very easily be wrong of my own view. I just think that there's loads of propaganda goes in both directions. But given that like Western society has been Christian for like over 1,000 years, in general terms, I think like Christianity gave most average people at least some sort of reasonably good moral basis, and losing it has been a very bad thing for the West.
Yeah, I mean, I take my Christian faith quite seriously, but I never liked the whole defacing of the Roman statues by Christians. I did, because I mean, the Roman Empire became a great medium for Christianity anyway. So
yeah, that's how it spread all around the civilized world, as it then just about was still.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, without the Roman Empire, I don't think Christianity would have got anywhere near as far as it got. What with bloody what's his name, Constantine, like converting on his deathbed, and then after Constantine, I think there was only one pagan emperor after Constantine, Julian the Apostate.
Yeah.
He was actually a pretty good emperor, but didn't live very long because he got killed on a military campaign.
Yeah. What was the one that got rid of how do you say it? Vestial virgins?
Yeah, that was one of the later ones.
Theo something. Yeah, he destroyed the empire. He destroyed the Roman Empire. He got rid of the Vestial virgins. That was it.
I think getting rid of tradition is generally a bad thing. Like, I support loads of traditions because traditions are good. They link us to our past. They tell us who we are.
Yeah.
But I do agree with something like, I watched this. Did any of you guys watch the Academic Agent stream?
Yeah.
When he did all those old films from 1900 up to about the 1980s of London.
Yeah.
And that's an excellent video if you haven't seen it. And one of the points that the guys on there make, I don't know if it was himself or somebody else, but like they were looking at things like the changing of the guard and what have you. And when you looked at the 1920s film and the 1930s film, it was something real. Whereas when you watch it these days, it's almost like it's a fucking, it's something in a theme park.
Yeah, it's just kind of for tourists, isn't it?
It's almost like it's not real and British. I mean, I don't say that. Like, I love the Trooping of the Colour, for example. I took my son to see the Trooping of the Colour when he was 4, and he sat on my shoulders and was very happy. I love that kind of stuff. But like, a lot of it, like, is almost like it's a fucking theme park for tourists rather than a real part of British society, which in the 20s and the 30s it obviously was. And the other thing you also noticed is you looked at the 1920s and 1930s London, And it was so clean. There was no litter anywhere.
Mm.
Virtually everyone was pretty well dressed, even in working class areas. Like the working class guys were pretty well dressed. I mean, they were out on a weekend, obviously, and they were probably wearing their Sunday best, but they were still pretty well dressed. It was just a totally different world and a better one.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to the Tower of London a few years ago, and that felt kind of fake and prosthetic. I didn't like that, to be honest.
Yeah. I listen, man. I went to all those places when I was a kid because I could walk to the Tower of London about 20 minutes for most of my childhood over Tower Bridge. And I went to most of those things. I used to go to the museums, and like the last time I went to the National Army Museum in Chelsea in London, I think they've moved it now, but it was in Chelsea, and the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. Both of them have been dumbed down completely. Like they used to be really good museums with lots of really good, serious information, and now they're basically sideshows because they're designed to appeal to people with no fucking intelligence. But also they've got loads of left-wing influences from the management, and it's obvious, you know. Like, you know, if you go to the National Army Museum, for some reason, although it's the British National Army Museum, the only people who should be in the British National Army Museum other than the British soldiers are the Gurkhas, who have been part of the British Army since 1948. But apart from that, like the Anglo-Indian Army is a different subject. But for some reason, there is loads of shit about the Anglo-Indian Army and soldiers in the West Indies and, you know, all this crap. And it's just done deliberately, and it's obviously done deliberately.
Yeah.
And the National Army Museum, we've got a YouTube channel, which I find disgusting because they've got a few good videos on there. Like, you know, there's a few bits and pieces on there which are quite interesting. But half of it is going on about a tiny minority of soldiers who were nothing like the vast majority of the British Army. So, you know, again, it's done deliberately. It's just pure globo homo, and it's pushed by the management who have gone through the university system we were talking about earlier, which, like, turns out these fucking socialist clones.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have seen the new history curriculum they're rolling out, but they skip over about 300 years following 1066 and then do a whole module on the Black Trumpeter in Henry VIII's court.
Oh, my God. Because that was obviously the most important person that was around at that time.
Yeah.
And it's like they never talk about the fact that, like, slavery was illegal in Britain from the 1780s at the latest. You could not be a slave in Britain because a British court gave a decision that the air of Britain was too free for anyone to be a slave. So Britain hasn't had slaves since before America was a country.
Yeah, something that I found kind of funny. They keep trying to imply, they never say it directly, but they always try to imply, whether it's on the Piers Morgan show or somewhere else, that like there were slaves in Britain or the slave ships came here before they went to America.
Utter bullshit.
And whenever someone hints that back to me, I just say, well, do you know how like ridiculous that sounds? That they're going to go up from Sierra Leone to the Canary Islands, and then they're going to sail all the way up past Spain and Portugal back to the UK, and then take the longest route across the Atlantic.
Yeah, it's just bullshit. Well, it was called the triangular route at the time, and when I was a kid, they were still teaching that in school, but I bet they don't now. But yeah, and like, you know, Britain was never really the leading country in the slave trade. The leading countries in the slave trade were always Portugal and Spain, which is why the populations of like Brazil, etc., are so bloody mixed today. Even in North America, the slave trade was only in part of what eventually became the USA. Like, it was never a big deal in the North. But I don't know, man. It's like this is what comes back again to what we were talking about education. They don't teach British history, real British history, to British kids anymore, which means they don't understand who they are. And all they get they get propaganda at school, and they come home and they watch propaganda on the mainstream media. And it's not just the news; it's like every single drama show almost. So how are these poor bloody kids supposed to get any idea of where they really come from and what great stock they really come from?
Well, I think a lot of it's to do with the fact that they know that in a couple of decades, you know, we will be near a minority or will be a minority, and there's a whole other class of people to cater to now. So
Well,
I think that's.
I don't think they're right, though. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I know that's the plan, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think that we will turn that around.
Well, based on current projections, that's
Yeah, I know it's the plan.
what
But
forecasts happen. So
I think we'll turn that around, and I just hope we can do it peacefully rather than not peacefully.
The thing is, how do you make? I mean, the reason they can get away with this, of course, is because the majority. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but the majority is silent. Like it's deracinated from its own defense. It's so. I don't know. I don't know how you change that. I don't know how you change that attitude in a large enough amount of people to make a difference.
No, nor do I. And we're a little YouTube channel. I'm a little YouTube channel anyway. Brutus is a slightly bigger one once he can stream again on his own channel. But I do think that maybe, I know Brutus is keen on this idea of networking, and I certainly support that. And I think we've got to get the right sort of people on who believe in the sort of things that we believe in, and like gradually spread our message. That's all we can do. We can try that as hard as we can, and it's going to make some difference. Whether it will make enough difference is another story entirely, but we can try. And if we don't bloody well try, we're as bad as the guys we're fighting.
I think one of the problems is that ultimately we are preaching to the choir.
Yeah, we've got to get new people in. I agree with that. Yeah, we've got to get more people in for sure.
And I'm not quite sure how that's really even possible.
Well, channels do become more popular. Like good channels, I know a couple of good channels that become like AA. I stopped watching AA at one stage about Academic Agent. I stopped watching him at one stage about 3 years ago because I thought he was too left wing. And then someone said to me, "Oh no, you should go and see him. He's come a long way." Like this was like probably 18 months ago or so. And I thought, all right then, I'll go and watch. And I watched a couple of streams, and yeah, he's come a long way to our side of things now. So yeah. It can happen, and he's got a channel that's pretty big and it's growing.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you had a YouTube channel that's got like 1 million subscribers, that's still the outreach there is still actually quite limited. Like that, you need to actually, if anything, there needs to be some sort of focus on taking back some sort of large cultural institution.
Yeah, no, I'm not against that, Adam, I just don't know how you do it. But I'm not against it. But I just think we've got to do the best we can. Like all of us do the best we can, basically, because that's all we can do. You know,
it's
we're
like,
all just individual guys.
The Salvation Army, right? The Salvation Army are very much on the outside, right? They're not part of the establishment. They're actively hated. And I mean, even if you look at like their adverts are sort of very low budget, but they still manage to stay in the mainstream. People still know who they are. So that's an example. I mean, that's a charity, obviously, but that there is an example that you can take back a cultural institution and keep it in the mainstream and propagate your message off of it.
Yeah, no, I'm not against that. Listen, the Salvos do a lot of good stuff. They do some good stuff for poor people. I remember when I was a kid, I used to like listening to their bands playing carols near Christmas time and this kind of stuff. So yeah, I got nothing against that kind of stuff.
I mean, maybe what we need is to get like 100 people to get a job at English Heritage.
Yeah, I think we've got to, like, as I said before, I think we've got to go multiple routes. Every single possible route we've got to try.
No, I don't agree with that. I think you have to be very targeted and very specific in what you do. Because
hang on, Toja, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we should just like spread ourselves like a shotgun somewhere. What I'm saying is that all practical routes we should try and look at. for different people. For different people, there are different things that different people can do. If you see what I mean.
Yes.
Well, like, here's an example. Is it better, or a question? Is it better to become a teacher or to get a job for the Department of Education?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Good night,
Because
Brutus.
I mean, obviously, if you can get a job, yeah.
He should have at least said good night, for God's sake. Is the man not
He did.
English manners? Did he? Oh, in the chat. Yeah,
in the chat. Fundamentally, you require the top positions at all of these institutions to be headed by our kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me seems like to be a good goal.
Right, but at the same time, I mean, even if you could get to the top and completely change the curriculum, aren't the sort of broadly leftist teachers under a broadly leftist teacher-student union going to diffuse your message so much by the time it gets to the bottom that any gain is lost?
But wouldn't the leftists have said that like maybe 60 years ago? Wouldn't the leftists have said that?
Yeah.
Or they could have, is what I'm trying to say. And eventually, if there's enough of you, like Peter Hitchens is quite interesting on this because, like his brother, he started off as a Trotskyist, and he makes it very clear that the long march through the institutions was entirely deliberate.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know that quite a lot of the NRX guys say we've got to be patient and do this stuff, although they tend to talk about parallel institutions rather than getting into the ones that are there now. But I think maybe you can do both.
Yeah, see, I'm more a fan of parasitism than sort of parallelism.
Yeah, I listen. The parallelism thing, I think, the whole NRX thing, I think it might work in America because it's a huge nation with a lot of space. But they are basically saying, like the full-on NRX guys. I mean, okay, there are some of them at the moment who are really supporting Trump, and I hope something nice happens on the 6th of January, etc. But what they're basically saying is that we've got to just forget about this for 50, 80, or even 100 years. And if you do that in a country like Britain, it's gone. It's just gone. You won't get it back. Not after 50, 80, or 100 years. It will be too far gone. That's why I'm not NRX. I just don't think it would work for Britain at all.
But you're only specifically looking at demographics in that respect.
Well, yeah. Absolutely I am. Because I wouldn't really care if Britain was the best country in the world, but 3/4 of the people there weren't really British.
Well, that's probably the case now, 3/4 quite easily.
No, it's not, is it? Not now.
Well, I think it probably is, Duke.
3/4 of the people in Britain are not really British. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Now,
I think come the next
demographically.
Yeah.
No, that's ridiculous, Sojo. I'm sorry. 3/4, 75%.
No, 3/4 would be 66.666 recurring. Actually, yeah, you're probably right. It's probably not. I think
the last time there was a census, it was 11%. I reckon this time will be maybe 18%.
I'm pretty certain it's
20% at worse.
I'm pretty certain it's already at 20%.
Well, hang on. What are you counting these as percentages of?
I'm talking about white versus. I'm talking about Anglo-Celtic white people in Britain.
So white British as the government class.
Yeah.
I mean, they were 80% of the last census.
No, it was higher than that. I mean, it was.
No, that's what the census says. Then that's what the census.
Yeah,
says.
I'm not suggesting that the census was entirely accurate because I know.
So you think they're overcounting the non-British population?
No, I think they're undercounting them because there are obviously.
Okay, so if the census says 20% and you think they're lying, then surely it's more than 20%.
I didn't think it was 20%. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. In 2010, or 2011, was it? Last census?
That's a man. Have you got the numbers
Was
to
it
hand?
actually 20% in 2011?
Yeah, it was 20% in 2011.
Yeah,
I've got the numbers here somewhere.
Is that including like not counting European people like in the UK as being?
No, there'd be white other.
Yeah, exactly. So then you're right. Fair enough. Then I'll agree with you. Sorry.
No worries.
80.1% in 2011.
Sorry.
80.1% in 2011.
Right,
And
but
it'll
that's
be-
counting the European guys who are in UK as not being white British, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Now I understand what you're saying. Fair enough. Now I believe you. Sorry, I got
and it'll probably be about 73 to 74% in 2021.
Yeah. Okay. Who are white British?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
okay,
not quite
that's-
3/4, but
Yeah, so it's 3/4 white and a quarter not white is what that really is saying, and it's less than that because it's also not allowing for the white Europeans who are in UK and white Americans and so on.
oh, sorry, you said 3/4, not 2/3. So that's why. Right, yeah. So yes, I think it will be near enough 3/4, not 2/3.
Who are white British?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I thought you were saying the opposite, which was to say that like 3/4 of the people would be immigrants, which is obviously not true. But
Yeah, I thought you were saying the opposite as well, actually.
yeah, that's what I thought you were saying, Sergio. That's the misunderstanding. I beg your pardon.
Oh no, sorry, but it will be 3/4. White British will be 3/4 of the population come the next census.
Yeah, that's what.
Right.
Now
okay.
I understand you, and I agree. Yeah. Okay, so we can still turn that around. That can be turned around. If we can either stop or drastically reduce mass border immigration, and also hopefully increase indigenous birth rates, then we can turn that around.
Yeah, but the problem is that how do you increase indigenous birth rates without also increasing the birth rates of non-indigenous groups?
Difficult, I'll grant you. Difficult. I think that there are ways you could do it, but like I think one of the things we've got to do is that people who immigrate to Britain, and I don't care if they're white or not white, there should be because I wouldn't make a distinction if they're white or not. But people who immigrate to Britain who are not indigenous British people should like get no welfare benefits whatsoever for at least 5 years. You commit a serious crime in UK for 5 years, or actually I'd like to make it 7 years, you get deported after your prison sentence. You go to prison, do your prison sentence, and you're stuck on a plane, go back wherever you came from. I'd do both of those things. I would certainly deport all the illegal immigrants I could possibly catch, and I would encourage the kind of grassing up that the government encourages over this stupid Chinese virus lockdowns, but I'd encourage that for like illegal immigrants. Apparently the British are quite keen on that stuff. So I'd do all those things. And because you are putting limits, I mean, I'd even, if I could, I'd say you get no benefits for 10 years. I think that would be perfectly acceptable too. For everyone, not brown people, but for everyone who comes in the UK.
Yeah, but this is all one big wish list.
Well, fine. Of course, it's a big wish list, Sojo. I mean, everything we talk about is a big wish list, you know? But what I'm saying is if you did that, then you could maybe incentivize real British people to have more kids.
Well, I mean, another thing you could do, I suppose, thinking about it, is that like in America, they're sort of pushing affirmative action in through the back door in some states. And what they're doing is they are getting basically every indicator, every demographic indicator that they could point to that basically points to black people, but without saying black people. And they use that as their marker. And I suppose you could just do exactly the same for white British.
Yeah, and I think like I said, one of the ways I think we could go is to stop talking about like brown immigrants and just talk about immigrants.
Yeah.
Like I know, for example, the British government has said that people who are coming in from the EU now won't get British benefits for 5 years. Well, that should extend to everybody.
I think it probably does.
Well, I don't think it does at the moment.
I think it does. I think what they mean by that is that Europe, because the Europeans won't be in, because we're not in the EU,
Yep.
and we don't have to, because you know with the EU that you have to treat Europeans who are in the EU the same as you would your citizens, so you can't discriminate on welfare and things like that.
Absolutely,
I think the message that they're saying is, well, now that we're no longer in the EU, we won't treat you the same as our own citizens, and you will be treated as every other immigrant would be treated.
Well, you're more confident on that than me, mate. I've looked at this and I haven't seen anything that the government says about so-called Commonwealth citizens. Which would be, and like, I've got nothing against Commonwealth citizens if they're the old Commonwealth, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. I have nothing against those guys. But generally, when the British government talks about Commonwealth citizens, they're talking about people from Nigeria and bloody Pakistan and all these shitholes in the world.
Well, you might have me there. I don't know if there are special exceptions for people in the Commonwealth. I don't know.
Yeah, I suspect they are, and like, as I said, like, old Commonwealth, that's what it's called. The old Commonwealth was basically Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and back in the day, it used to include South Africa. Hasn't for a long time because South Africa left the Commonwealth in the 1960s, but I'm a Kanzuk supporter, so I would certainly have special arrangements for those guys. But the new Commonwealth, which is to say half the shitholes in the world, nothing, wouldn't do a thing. But I would not. I wouldn't discriminate just on like race as such. I'd just say, well, where are you coming from? And it's perfectly possible it might be an Aboriginal guy from Australia or a Maori guy from New Zealand. I wouldn't discriminate against those guys.
I think I'm going to have to go, mate. It's 20 to 12.
Yeah, no worries.
Well, it was a good stream, and I'll speak to you later on.
Yeah, go well, mate. No, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, you're welcome. Cheers, guys. Bye, everyone.
See you later.
Yeah, no worries. Adamant, probably the last thing we're going to cover. What do you reckon is going to happen in the USA on the 6th of January? Anything? Nothing?
Isn't it already too late?
I don't know. Americans I follow, and like, I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm not an American. But Americans I know think it's not. They think 6th of January is kind of the last date that anything serious is going to happen. There's supposed to be a huge rally in Washington, D.C. that a lot of Americans like I follow who are going to go to. And quite a lot of them are worried it's going to turn violent at some stage from the left and possibly from the cops, because it's a democratic city, obviously. Democratic in the American left-wing sense of the term. So yeah, I don't know. I hope Trump's got something up his sleeve, but whether he has, I don't know. A lot of Americans I like and follow on YouTube and other places still think it can be saved. So maybe it can. Maybe. I hope so.
I did notice that Mike Pence, he was supposed to be going on a foreign engagement.
Yeah.
And he cancelled it at the last minute.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And that was the same day. He cancelled it the same morning that Trump went and I think he went into like the Oval Office on a day when they usually don't over the holidays.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I say, I know loads of Americans who are going to Washington, D.C. for this protest. And it needs to be huge. It really does. But a lot of them are going there prepared to be shot at by the cops. So
yeah,
there are people going who are like military veteran guys. They're by no means kind of no sort of extremists, you know. These are American military veterans who have gone and fought for America in some wars that I happen to think were largely useless. But I mean, in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. But these guys are going there to try and defend the American Constitution, because they believe that if Biden and Harris take over, it's going to turn America into a huge, very heavily armed banana republic, because the election was obviously stolen. There's just so much evidence of that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the things I've noticed over this whole election was how well the Constitution was actually written, considering those guys couldn't possibly know what way the US was going. It was written with such a raw understanding of human nature and the politics of power, and it's got everything in it that Trump needed to pull this off. But I don't think he had the right people in the right places.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, like I say, I still hope he'll win. But a lot of Americans who I kind of respect, and I think are intelligent, good blokes, and patriotic blokes, a lot of people think that if this goes wrong on the 6th, then America is in a lot of trouble. And like in Minecraft, all sorts of things could happen.
Yeah.
And like people, like there are over 70 million Americans voted Trump. And America has got more guns than people, like civilian people. And from everything I've seen and read from other people, Biden and Harris and like the Globo Homo cathedral establishment, whatever you want to call them, they can't rely on the trigger pullers in the American military. Like your average troops in the Army and the American Marine Corps, they're not going to open fire on like guys who are basically their buddies and their fathers and their brothers, and they're just not. And I think Biden and Harris would be extremely stupid to think they will. Oops. I think I've lost Sojo. I've lost Adam. So anyway. Hang on, he's back. There you go,
Something
man.
like that. I'll drop there for a second.
Yeah, no worries. I was just saying, I think that Biden and Harris and the Globo Homo Cathedral will be very foolish if they rely on the actual, like the ordinary grunts to open fire on people who are basically their brothers and family and friends. I think they'll be very foolish. Like there are generals in the American armed forces who are absolutely full-on supporters of social liberalism and Globo Homo. But the guys who pull the triggers, much less so. Like junior officers down, if I was them, I wouldn't rely on them, put it that way.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, a lot of those red states are the biggest recruiting blocks for the army. So
yeah, but you've got to look at the military in America, and I didn't fully understand this until I spoke to some American military guys and veteran guys. What happens is that, like the transport units, for example, and the supply units and all this kind of shit, they're full up with like American black women and stuff like that. Yeah, they are. There's loads of them. But if you look at the actual combat units of, say, the U.S. Marine Corps or most of the American,
I've seen this.
Yeah, they're not anywhere near as diverse at all. There are black guys and like Hispanic guys and the rest of it in those T farms, but they tend to be pretty based individuals of that type.
Yeah, I imagine it's because they don't, because the sort of the non-white American doesn't feel the same commitment to the institutions and the society. Because you see the same thing over here with like the police force is overwhelmingly white and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I think you'll find that like the red state guys, and also don't forget there are plenty of pretty based working class guys in red states. You know, it's a bit like if you look at the Labour Party supporters in England, lots of them are actually pretty socially conservative. You know.
Yeah.
So I think that's much the same in the USA, and I just think they're not going to be able to like the left-wing globo homo types are not going to be able to rely, and corporate globalist types, they're not going to be able to rely on the trigger pullers in the American military. And even if they could, like, America is an enormous country, and the American military, even if all of it was in America, which most of it isn't, but even if all of it was, just isn't big enough to control it.
Yeah.
It's just not. I mean, like, one of the reasons, like, the Brits didn't win the American War of Independence was partly because it was also supported by the French and the Spanish and the Dutch, but it was just such an enormous place, you know. And in those days, it wasn't even as big as it is now, because, like, the West was basically just nothing to do with anything, you know. So yeah, I just think interesting days in the US coming up, and I advise all nationalist and traditionalist guys to watch channels like Plebeian Media, for example. He's a good channel, on January the 6th, and watch what happens with this Trump thing in Washington, D.C. Because I think
the only thing
whatever
with
is...
the protesting though is it's only really good for morale though, and not really much else. I mean, this guy in chat, End Leftism, asked, would this channel be interested in becoming a protest committee that organises action instead of just talking? I'm very glad to organise, but I kind of think unless the organising is how do we get 100 base nationalists into a local council?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really see how it helps us. I mean, even you look at that march in America. Well, in fact, talking about marches in America, look at the March for Life. It's the biggest annual political march besides BLM this year. It's marched every year for however long. It's never gotten anything done.
And they don't even cover it on the mainstream media because it doesn't support their narrative.
Yeah. So, I mean, protesting only really works if you're pushing on an open door.
I don't know, Adam. And look, I hesitate to say too much because I don't want to do Fed posting and so on, you know. But a lot of people who I like think that this 6th thing, something's going to happen.
Yeah,
like, good or bad. It might be bad. It might not be a good thing. It might be a bad thing, at least initially. But it might kind of polarize stuff, if you see what I mean. And that's probably as far as I can, like, speak openly about. That's the other thing I'd say to end leftism, is that, like, if you talk openly about this, like, real world organizing stuff on the internet, you face a lot of problems. You really do. I think if you're going to do that, you need to do it face to face in private, largely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't think Biden winning is that big of a deal. I think if Trump wins, it's cool. It's good for us. It's better for us more than anything. But we get 4 more years of Trump, great. But if Trump loses, what you've actually then got is 40% of America pissed off, disassociated, and ready for action, and that's kind of quite a bit more useful.
I think you could conceivably in Minecraft end up with a civil war if Biden wins. That's what I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying it'll happen, but it easily could. It easily could. And I'm not saying it wouldn't be like the 1861-65 thing with mass great armies. This would be much more something like what was euphemistically called the Troubles in Northern Ireland for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
Like the British Army, half the British Army was based in Northern Ireland. And it was sometimes nearly half the army was based in Northern Ireland for like 30 years. And there were never more than about 500 hardcore provisional IRA terrorists at most. And it was probably less than that, really.
Yeah.
And also what the PIRA guys, the provisional IRA, they had very few veterans. They had a few British Army veterans, but very few, like a handful. Whereas the American guys on the right in America, they have many, many, many thousands. So it would be a whole different ballgame. And also, of course, the American people have got vastly more weapons than the provisional IRA could ever have dreamed of, you know. So, yeah, I think we live in interesting times, but I would advise British nationalists to keep an eye on the US on the 6th of January and see what happens. I mean, I hope, obviously, that everything is resolved peacefully and no one gets hurt. And I hope that Trump stays in office because I think he really won. But it's interesting. We need to watch and see what happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we probably covered all that shit. We're coming up to 3 hours, which is probably just about enough time. You got anything you want to shill, mate?
No, I'm all good.
All right, guys. Thank you for coming on, Outman. Ladies and gents, thank you for listening to our drivel for a couple of hours. Hopefully you found it interesting. I've been told, by the way, by my friends, I should say, please like and subscribe to the channel. Because, I get loads of viewers, but I'm getting not enough people subscribing, and apparently that's important. So that's my shilling for the evening. I will say, hopefully this month I'll have Colin Liddell on again, who's a great guy. I'm looking to have the Franklin on, and I'm hoping to have I can't remember the guy's name now. He was in the chat earlier. I'm hoping to have this chap in from America at some point as well. So have a good evening, ladies and gents, and be well.